G'day podcasters, welcome back to Season 6 of True Blue Conversations with your host Adam Bloom, the author of Easy Target, now available at adambloom.com.au. 8 years ago, after returning from 3 tours of Afghanistan and then gaining experience and education in financial planning, Warren Loudon teamed up with fellow veteran Dave Vaughan and started Loudon & Vaughan Private Wealth, founded with the underlying belief that every person matters and every dollar counts, providing comprehensive tailored financial advice and wealth management services for you and your family. Loudon & Vaughan will guide you towards your financial goals with integrity and transparency. Whether you're planning for retirement, investing for the future, or managing your family's wealth, they've got you covered. Visit loudonandvaughan.com.au or call 02 9538 2704 to book a meeting with Warren today.
G'day, welcome back to True Blue Conversations. Today I'm joined by a good mate of mine actually, and I'm coming to you live from his house up in the beautiful sunny Newcastle, and it's a real honour and a privilege to share his story. This man has done multiple deployments all around the world, and he's here to tell us about his journey and what he's doing now, still currently serving as a reservist. And it's an absolute honour and a privilege to have him on. So, Dave Smith, welcome to the podcast, mate.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Thanks for having me, mate. An absolute privilege to be here, and thanks for taking the time to travel out of Sydny to come up all the way to sunny Newcastle, not Newcastle. We like to call it Newcastle, and the lovely Fern Bay. Yeah.
No, mate, thank you. It's absolutely awesome, mate, to be up here and share your story. So, mate, you as I said, joined the Army, still serving. Let's go back before the Army. Tell me about a young Dave as a young fellow. What was life like growing up?
Wow, yeah, that's going to stretch the memory bank. But look, me growing up was a young kid growing up on the Central Coast. I was the son of a train driver and a hairdresser on the Central Coast around Woy Woy, Yamina, and eventually lived at a place called St Hubert's Island. Passionate about, not very passionate about school. I was more passionate about rugby, soccer, and very passionate about surfing as I grew up, and something I still do today. I went to a high school that I very much like other people. When you think, oh, my high school cringe, I went to a place called Woy Woy High, and people tell you it's probably one of the roughest schools on the coast. Look, we live by the motto: I survived Woy Woy High.
So, mate, very working class, and I'm guessing chasing girls as well back in the younger days?
Oh, yeah, I tried very hard. Don't think I got very far.
So, for you, mate, what was your first job as a young fella?
First job while I was still at school, I started a job at Pizza Hut.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, doing a bit of prep work. I think on weekends I did like the morning prep shift. It was like a 4 a.m. start to go in and make what you'd call a pan pizza. If they, I don't even know if Pizza Hut still does that sort of thing. They do a pan pizza, was a big floating crust, and it was the most disgusting thing. They used to sit in oil for 8 hours before people ate them. So I'd never eaten a pan pizza or a Pizza Hut pizza since, unless I'm totally forced to. So worked at that. That was the old one in Woy Woy.
Yeah, right.
Did that. That was my first job.
So you joined the Army. We'll get to in 1989, but did you have any family members that had served before you, or were you the first?
Definitely had family members, and probably the biggest role model in my life, I had two grandfathers, both served in different areas. My grandfather on my mother's side, who was, I will go for the name here, so Isaac Richard Octavius Spreadbar, joined in the second day IF. He also had uncles in the First World War as well.
Yep.
All from the Killarney district in South Queensland. He was part of the first, 2nd, 4th Independent Company, or 2nd, 4th Commando Squadron. Original Carter. He fought in all the battles from Tidal River to Tarakan, including doing the relief in place with the 2nd Company in East Timor.
Yep.
When I might have heard the story about Winnie the War Winner, who was the radio they put together. Mm-hmm. My grandfather was in Darwin at that time doing patrolling. They had different companies and different parts of the squadron patrolling rivers up north. They were brought in thrown on a ship and sent into East Timor to relief second in place. Did a couple of months there supporting the East Timorese and spying on the Japanese and fighting the Japanese, and then pulled out. And he survived in that squadron all the way to Balikpapan.
Yeah,
so
right.
One of the only ones, one of a very small number that went all the way through.
Far out. And for you, mate, we'll get to when you deployed, mate. So bit of a soft spot and a connection to East Timor for you.
Absolutely. I was telling someone this the other day, and actually my wife, Kelly, she didn't know this story. I was telling her a story about barbecues at my place, my mum and dad's house, and for my grandfather. And we used to have the old 2nd, 4th Independent Company Commando Squadron barbecues and fundraisers there. I didn't know at the time those fundraisers were raising money for the Falantel, who was fighting against the East Timor, the Timorese government at the time, which was Indonesian.
Yep.
Supporting them. I used to have people like Joseph Ramos Horta at my house, who I was 15 or 14-year-old kid walking around, who ended up being in the UN, president of East Timor and so forth. Shanana Guzmao, I never met him. He was in jail at that time.
Right.
But I did meet Joseph Ramos Horta and a bunch of those people around that time.
Right. Far out. And
that was our connection to East Timor way before I went there.
Yeah, right. And for you, like, your other grandfather served as well, and then obviously that was a big drawing card for you. And did you want to? So you joined in 1989, and obviously drew you because of your grandfather. But talk me through the process back then, because there wasn't the internet,
different.
there wasn't 1901. So talk me through that process.
I really, I was like most, probably 50% or more the young kids that got to Kapooka at those days. I really did not have a single idea what I was in for. All I knew that my grandfather was a commando, and my other grandfather was in the artillery and the searchlight batteries. Arthur Smith, he was there, and we thought, the army would be all right. And I was doing a job working for Sydney Electricity, and I was going to start an apprenticeship with them. And I was sitting in Sydney thinking, wow, I'm not really interested in this. This is pretty boring. Is this what it all is? Is this what life is after school? So I walked down to Castlereagh Street in my lunch hour, and the guy I worked for was a veteran. And I walked down to Castlereagh Street, walked into the recruiting. Actually, at the time, I thought I wanted to join the Navy. All of a sudden, talked to a person there, signed a bit of paperwork. 3.5 weeks later, I think I was on a bus with Kapooka.
And how old were you at that point?
17.
Wow. So, all right, I want to talk to you about this because you joined in 1989,
Yep.
No political correctness. What was Kapooka like, mate, in 1989 for a 17-year-old kid? What do you remember? Was it shock and awe? And
Very confronting. And my mum will still testify to this today. My mum, Fran, she will testify to this today. I think it was week 3, and I got one of my phone calls home, and all I wanted to do was get her to come down and pick me up and get me out of there. And I was like, get me out of this place. And it was like, you'll be all right. It's okay, honey. And they were like, we're never coming to pick you up. You're staying there. So,
right.
That was my experience. And Kapooka back in those times, it was very old school. We were still wearing greens. We had SLRs, we had greens, we had the whole picture, right?
Yep.
An unusual place, still very, compared to the day's environment, very male dominated, very misogynistic in styles and behaviour. We had a sister platoon at that time, 32 platoon.
Mm-hmm.
We'd go into meetings like, you have your cultural history at company level, and they'd put 13 platoon, I was 13 platoon Bravo company. They put us in one side of the room, and they'd tell us, the female platoon's coming in. You're not even to look at those things. They are front bums. Don't even look to your left. You look to your left, your life, you'll be on CBs before you know it.
Wow.
And they'd walk into the room, sit down, and we'd be like 17-year-old kids. I can't even look that way. And I remember marching past their barracks. They had half a Delta company, which was dedicated for the women.
Mm-hmm.
They made us do an eyes right, and we weren't to look at them because they weren't worthy of being there. Sort of thing, right?
Wow.
And you're like, wow, what sort of organisation do I join? But it was just the culture at the time, right? Coming from a family where my mum worked, ran hairdressing salons her whole life, dad worked, come from that very liberal style family, both worked hard. I thought, wow, this is a sort of the world I've never seen before. Most of it was harmless, but you just sort of picked up that vibe. That was still very male dominated. The girls had only been there for a few years, I believe, by that time, 1989. I think they started in 87, going to Kapooka. a lot of barriers for them to break down. And obviously over time, those barriers are being broken down even more. I ended up working with some great people, in the Army, male and female, including Kim Felmingham. I worked with her. She's now the first female RSM of the Army. I worked with her at 1 Sig Regiment and talk to her regularly now. So proves that we have come a long way from 1989 or 1987 they came in to how they fit into the Army and their whole profile.
100%. And for you, mate, it would have been, because you would have been post-Vietnam era, mate. So we were. And so still very hard men from Vietnam as your instructors.
Absolutely. A lot of them were, the sergeants and the warrant officers. They had a lot of Vietnam veterans around still. The bombardiers and the corporals, less of, though most of them had come through that, the peacetime Army post-Vietnam. Really unusual place. And I remember at the time we were under a trial, and I didn't even know what a trial was. I was 17. So we were under running platoons and marching platoons. All right, so we ended up being a running platoon. So everywhere we went back and forth to the range, down to things, we basically ran everywhere. The marching platoon, I worked out later, was the guys with the packs on. I went, right, I'm kind of glad I got the running platoon because I was pretty fit and young at that stage. I played a lot of rugby as a kid before I joined. Played a bit of schoolboy rugby for the Central Coast, went to the New Zealand and played rugby over there. So the running bit, I was good with. The psychological trauma stuff of being attacked all day and having somebody in your face, spitting in your face and screaming at you because I left my locker undone for the third time. It was like, wow, that was a bit hard for young Davey Smith to take.
So after that, mate, back then, did you get a choice of where you wanted to go, or were you just core allocated?
They gave you a big selection. I didn't know how it worked, obviously, like everyone. Some people might have had an idea, been in the reserves before. I had an idea of sort of what I wanted to do. We did our testing and it came back I could do a bunch of jobs. And I went, I want to do this and that. Well, they said, well, there's your selection. Infantry, artillery, armoured, catering, and we've got 2 spots as aviation handlers. All right, okay. Guess I put all these down. I can't remember what I put down my priority. By the time we got to week 10, it was like, you're going to artillery, gun number. Okay, what's that? Oh, you fire the guns for the artillery. Okay, fair enough. That's at Manly. Sounds all right. Yeah, I'm going to go do that at the School of Artillery. So, best choice ever made. Well, not made, sort of made for me. Best selection. I didn't want to try for anything else. I went, I'll give that a go to the Corps. Made some of the best friends I've ever had. Long friends for the rest of my life from that part of my course. So
mate, one of them we're both good mates with, Huck. So,
Mark Hennery.
Mark Hennery, and a former podcast guest.
Yeah, the only problem with Mark, mate, he was in 101 battery. It was a pretty awful battery. He eventually grew up and he joined 103.
Nothing like in a rivalry, mate.
He matured at some stage, but joined 103 battery. Yeah.
So. Mate, so you didn't want to go infantry. You were wanting to go.
I never really had a focus. I really didn't have a focus on anything. And I put the selections down and came back artillery. So I probably bit of affection to Manly as well, where the school was. I heard we're an IMA. Undoubtedly, haters are going to hate. I'm a Manly fan. I've gone for Manly my whole life.
I won't hold that against you, mate.
Well, short story. Graham Eady was from the coast, then he around there in my local rugby league club. There used to be big posters of Graham Eady and that sort of stuff. And growing up at our age, there was not many other teams. It was the Sydney-based teams primarily. So you either went for Manly or North Sydney, where you grew up on the coast where I was. Sort of split half and half, and I just went for Manly. Just like my mum, she goes for Manly all the time.
Well, mate, hopefully they can get a win for you this weekend. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
They're up for it. The doggies are doing well, but I'm right behind Manly for life.
I'm pretty confident you'll get up, mate. I was confident last night when Penrith won, mate. So let's hope it can be a 4-peat for us this year. So
I think it could be.
Yes, they played very well. But mate, I want to talk about you go to Manly, and so you march out of Kapooka, and is that 6 weeks, or was that 12 weeks back when you went?
13 weeks.
13 weeks?
13 weeks, yeah.
Yeah, right.
They had that was the full, still Vietnam style, right? It was, that still period. So
you march out, different man, you become a man, not a,
I was on I wouldn't say I became a man overnight. I think I was on the journey. And what made me grow up was my time in artillery and some great mentors. I went to a reunion this year at the School of Artillery, and some of those mentors were were there. You know, for example, I'll call them out, like Chris Moore, one of my bombardiers, you know, great mentor. And another great mentor was David Appo, right? He was an absolute, firm, fair and consistent gents, right? Who taught you, gave you the pat on the back when you did something good, but also kicked in the ass so firmly when you were out of line. And, I was out of line many times.
Well, I suppose you're still a kid, aren't you? You're 17. Like you got to grow up. Like you're joining a man's, like it's a man's world. What you're going into. Yeah, another guy that I'd call out that helped me on that journey of becoming a man. Another gun sergeant I had, Trevor Wish, and another leader in RSM I had, which was Wayne Parker, Pooh Parker. He was a guy that I really respected, and he was a WO1 by the time I was a bombardier, right? Yeah,
so
right.
Those sort of people, you take little buckets out of people's, I got taught earlier, take a little bit out of each one's leadership bucket or moral bucket, and you get that and you make your own mix of what you want to be as a leader or a man. And I've taken little pieces out of those buckets my whole life, especially that time period, 17 through to 30 in artillery before I had a corps change. That's where I grew up, in a combat arms support role, servicing the guns and various other things, driving trucks with them. That's how I learned.
So talk me through your initial employment training at Manly. Like, what are you, because I don't know much about artillery. I know they go bang, and you like talk me through training, and what was the hardest part of your training?
The training at Manly was, this is how old it is. I was on the second Hamel course, which is the 489 gun course. Mark Huck's a little bit older, by the way. He was on the first Hamel course. Well, he might have been on the one before it. Who knows? He's older. So it was, they had a gun park set up at North Head. They had a couple of guns there. The rest of the school was laid out. And to me, it's the traditional home of the gunner, the School of Artillery Manly. I know they have it in Puckapunyal now, but traditionally the home. We do our gun drill on the park. We do our training on the park there at the gun park. I do remember doing kneeling gun drill, which is you rotate on the gun and then you got to kneel, and it was made on gravel. Getting very sore knees, and I do remember, don't ever look at a plane flying overhead, all right? Because the first time I looked at a plane flying overhead, we had a gun sergeant who was quite ruthless, Paul Filthy, and you like airplanes, do you, Gunner Smith? Oh, yeah, it's a nice jumbo there, Sarge. He goes, yeah, well, get your wings out and start flying around the parade ground, and make you run around the parade ground like an idiot, because you have your wings out. And if you didn't pay attention anymore, they make you take the breech block out, and there was a trig point at the top of the sand dunes there. You had to take the breech block up to the trig point and back, and then put it back into the gun. So I was on the Hamel course, and for completion of that training, I went to Singleton, fired a few rounds, did all the positions on the gun, less the command positions, and we finished that training. And I remember going into the office there, and they had posting allocations from those times: 4 Field Regiment in Townsville, 1 Field Regiment in Brisbane before it went to Ready Reserve, and we had 8 12th Medium Regiment, which was 1 brigade in Sydney before it went to Darwin. I went into the bombardier and he goes, where do you want to go, Gunner Smith? And I went, I don't really know, Bombardier. He goes, don't worry, I'll sort it out for you. Didn't get a choice. I just walked out the door and I got 1 Field Regiment. And out of 40 people on the course, I was one of 5 that got 1 field in Brisbane.
Yeah, right.
And I remember walking out there and people going, mate, I'll give you money for this. And one guy offered me $1,000 from a posting cycle, and I almost took it because my car was worth about $800 and $1,000 was a lot. And I thought, I'm going to take that. No, hang on. Why are people trying to give me money for this place? And I'd never really been to Brisbane as an adult or anything. I went, sounds all right. So now I'm going to take the posting and went to 1 Field Regiment. That's when I went to 1 Field, marched into my first battery, which was 105 Field Battery. So I was originally a Tiger, and met Hanbury across the road, who was a Hammer at 101.
So you get there, mate, and how were you received when you got when you got there and arrived at Brisbane?
It was odd because you're just let loose, no restrictions after hours, and you're put into the regiment, got to your battery, and it was basically, what sport do you play? When you arrive, and so I play rugby. Excellent, we've got a grand final coming up. We've got games coming up. Loved my rugby. Don't ever say I was great, but I loved my rugby at the time, and played a lot of rugby with Army and different stages. Not Army team, but played with Army sides and brigade sides and that, and really enjoyed that part. Doing the PT and then having 2 days of rugby training a week. Yep. It was good. Met a lot of amazing people, some absolute legends of the Corps. A lot of them were posting down from Townsville, and met some absolute great people. The competition was awesome. like all the time.
And you would have, you worked with a previous guest mate, Ian Langford, who would go on and have a distinguished career himself. And, mate, what was that like working alongside Ian in the younger days?
Mate, what an amazing leader, because full circle. He's one of the most amazing leaders the Australian Defence Force has ever produced. That's my personal opinion. That's coming from my space. When I met Langers, he was a young kid who marched into the battery, 103 battery, on the gun line. And we discussed it earlier. I remember him being fronted by the battery commander at the time, basically, "Why are you here, Gunner Langford?" He was definitely, he was definitely not the same breed as the rest of us gun numbers there, and destined for better things, or not for better things, but destined to do something else out of that path. Yeah, he was fantastic. Can fight. All right, so because back in the day, you used to have a lot of gun bay bashings or gun bay cricket, and a lot of people just roll over, take a few punches, and it's all over. No, he's the guy that would just come at it, and you got to do your best. It would take 5 or 6 people to get him down, and he'd still be fighting and punching. And no wonder he became he went to SF and went to Commando and that. I remember doing my second last trip into Afghanistan, and I got the brief, and they said, Langers is the CEO of the task force. Walked into his office, and I'm there with a bunch of young captains, and he looks across the room and said, "G'day, sir, how you doing?" He goes, "Gee, Smithy, it's been a long while, hasn't it, mate?" I said, "Yeah, roles are sort of reversed. I'm not your Florencio anymore, mate." Legend of a guy, legend of a leader.
And mate, a lot of the boys from Commando say he's one of the fittest blokes you'll ever meet, and just an amazing man. And as I say, have the privilege of having him on the potty, mate. Just one of those guys that there's not much of him, but just demands respect.
True leader. He's a guy. He doesn't ask you to do. He demonstrates what to do. That sort of guy. Well, there's a few of them I've run in the army, and he's right up there.
Absolutely. Well, mate, you don't get awarded 3 distinguished service crosses if you're not that type of caliber of man. Like just an amazing man. And as he said, he only ever wanted to be a section leader. That was all he ever wanted to do. Yeah.
Humble. And not many people sort of knew that he came from the ranks, right? And it probably got something to do with his cake mix, right? How he put himself together over life. Yep. Spending those few years in the ranks, I'm sure that he took things away. He's a smart guy.
Absolutely. And so, you're surrounded by some pretty good, decent human beings that have made and shaped who you are. And so talk me through your first deployment, mate, to Bougainville, and how long was this deployment, and what was your role over there?
So first deployment Bougainville. So this is pre-Interfet, right? And I was basically pulled into a room and said, "Look, we're going to do this. We're talking about soldiers' medallions, or I've got a friend that might be able to get you on a trip to Bougainville. Where they're looking at running a trip to go sort the equipment out over there." I was a loggy by that stage. I think I'd badged over to ordnance for about 4 or 5 months from artillery. So I went from a bombardier to a corporal overnight. Mm-hmm. And they said, "Look, you can go in." I said, "Yeah, this would be great." One of my best mates in the world, absolute legend, Dino Cass, was already over there at this stage. This is before he did his loadies course. He was already a QE over there working. Yeah, I said I'd go in. So I went into the main base there around Ara and worked around doing all the logistic support, and maintenance, and then did a lot of site tours and so often, went out to the field to the different patrol sites, did all the equipment maintenance, looked after their gear, and so forth. So it was really peace monitoring. Did all the things you do in a peace monitoring group. Went out and hand out leaflets, did all the community engagements, but you also got to see some of the bits of the world that people don't see, like we're disease free in Australia pretty well by vaccinations and so forth. You see a kid that's actually survived and lived with polio, and they're everywhere, right? And you go, "Well, what's wrong with him? He's got a club foot, getting on with life." Or you see the society over there, how they've just gone through years of warfare and trauma, and just come out. It's such a beautiful island people that just brought themselves out of trouble and still progressing now. But an amazing place. Bougainville was an amazing place. And while I was there, Interfet kicked off. And I had a bunch of people on the island that were there with me that all wanted to get back to the units because they're all going to East Timor and everything's kicking off. I'm just sitting there going, I'm pretty happy just to get a deployment. you know, because at that stage, unless you went to Cambodia or something like that, very few people were deployed. You know, very few people had any, you know, lolly wrappers on their chest because, you know, it wasn't even an ADM at those stage. So most people were just clean shirts like me. And I thought, wow, I'm pretty happy just to get overseas and, you know, do my job once overseas. So,
and it's like, as you say, mate, like those early trips, like after, like we're still peacetime army, and like Somalia and all those, Cambodia, all those trips, mate, as you say, were few and far between. And so to be over there, because how old were you on that first trip?
I can't recall. I must have been mid-20s somewhere, and yeah, it was a good trip. I met some absolute, you know, I've said to you before when we first met, you know, I don't feel myself as anyone that's done anything special, but I've had the privilege of working with some of the most amazing people that have ever stepped into a uniform, right? I've just had the privilege to work around them, support them, or be with them. You know, Clint Palmer, you know, from Perth, from the SAS. I remember he was our team lead over there when he was, I think he was a sergeant or a warrant officer for a thing called ground maintenance team. So, but ground maintenance team was a cover for us to run recovery operations. So he was obviously a team lead, and he'd just get a bunch of nobodies, you know, mechanics and raming guys and ordnance guys, and he'd teach us how to drive Zodiacs, he'd teach us how to do winching and rappelling. So we'd spend our spare time, it was a voluntary thing, so Sunday afternoons we'd go training. So we'd learn how to do alongsides, along boats at sea, we'd learn how to do, set up beach landings so we can go rescue team sites if we had to get out of the country really quick. So my job was on those boats with my mate Dean, and also learning how to winch people out and put people on the jungle penetrator and get them out of the jungle. So it was some pretty cool stuff as well, you know, to do that. I do have the record of getting Clint Palmer overboard on an official thing. So we're going alongside HMNZ Manamanui, the New Zealand dive ship, and we're going alongside to hook up the ribs. And as he's at the bow of the boat, he said, anyone gets me off today, you know, it's going to cost the carton now if anyone falls over. As I'm going up and he's going to hook on, he didn't look. And I'm sitting at the back of the Zodiac, and just as he turned to the rope, I've hit a wave and I hit the throttle, and he's come running down, falling down the back of the Zodiac. So I just ducked, and he just flew overboard into the drink. And I just got, oh my God. And they blew the horn and everything else, and man overboard. And I said, oh, how'd that go? And he goes, we've got to rate that as an official man overboard because he just hooked up, so he technically connected to the ship, and we have to report that to Canberra.
Mate.
He gets back on the boat, and I was just going, I don't want to face him. I drove back with another bowman in the boat, and I was like, I don't want to face Clint. I ran into him years later on a DMO course. He never forgotten. He never let me forget that. Apparently, it was my fault.
Mate, all fun and games, And so you go over there, you see what it's like, and do you come back with a better appreciation of home and how lucky we are, or not luck, but how privileged we are over definitely. Here in our country?
It sort of started there, yeah. I was very fortunate to get that spot as it was. I was very fortunate to get overseas at that time. I think it was more deployments later I really started to embed, you know, how lucky we are as Australians and, you know, what we have here in our country and how the standard of living, right? That was one of the big things. And I think as I got older and when my son was born, really ingrained in me. East Timor further on, that really ingrained in me. Yeah.
So you come back from Bougainville, mate, and what's happening next where do you post into and what's happening next in your career?
So next in my career, I posted up to 1 SIG Regiment, or 1 JSU at the time, Joint Support Unit, and basically attached to DJF HQ. Sat there for a couple of years. That's where I got to work with the fantastic people. Once again, around some great people who've done some great things. Nothing special, but the people I work with are awesome. I worked with Kim Felmingham. She was, you know, she was the Medwo when I was at 1 JSU.
Yep.
Worked with her a lot, being, you know, in the Q store over there, and then I ended up doing a bit of time in A Squadron, working with the SIGs, and probably need to dovetail that off, right? Kim Felmingham, for those who aren't aware, is the first female RSM in the Army. You know.
Yeah, only just recently appointed too. So
and holds the Nurse's Cross, I think.
Yeah, which And, you know, as you say, mate, come a long way from back in 1987.
Yeah, that's right. It's come a long way. You know, I have caught up with her. Being on a reserve down at Army headquarters, I've caught up with her a few times, and it's fantastic to see that she went that far.
Absolutely. And so, mate, I want to go forward a little bit to 9/11, mate, where everyone knows where they were that day, and what do you remember of that day? And did you think that we'd be involved in our longest war going into the Middle East?
Yeah, I probably I know where I was, like everyone else. And I say this often to a lot of people that are not in the defence circle and around that. So this is the day that changed my life and so many of my friends' lives. And you've got to get that connection. For a lot of people aren't aware that, you know, when 9/11 happened, you know, Australia went into the ANZUS Treaty, right? America didn't call us, we activated it for them. So we went into our longest war based on Australia activating the ANZUS Treaty. And that's what, from my knowledge, happened. I was at 1 JSU, 1 SIG regiment up in Brisbane, and I just remember as I was hitting the towers, going to base and watching barbed wire go up all around Enoggera, which were those days, you could walk through there. Kids could walk home on the way from school, walk through your base. They had front gates, back gates. There was no IDs. The GMPs, the Garrison Military Police, were uniformed people when you just did it as an extra duty. There was no paid security guards. So the world changed overnight. Even how our defence bases, they changed overnight. The threat changed overnight. That's how I ended up doing 9/11, and then staying a few days at work until they worked out what was going on. It was a surreal time in uniform. Nobody knew what they were doing. You know, everyone's spooling up thinking we're going to go and do something, albeit we know how it played out now.
Yeah, it took a few years down the track, but then things ramped up, and they ramped up very quickly, and we'll get to that a little bit later in the podcast. But mate, I want to talk about, so you had your first trip to Bougainville, and then you deployed to East Timor, mate. As you said, your family connections there.
Yep.
Was that 2001 you were over there?
2002.
Yep.
So Untayet.
Yep.
However, I was attached originally to the Australian Training and Support Team, which eventually evolved themselves into defence cooperation programs. But those days it was still warlike in Timor. It was only a 1-year gig, so it was a full 12 months.
Yeah, right.
Full 12 months sitting over there doing the job. So it was amazing. So we were basically attached to training the Falantel into becoming the East Timorese Army and their small navy, so forth. So we had bases at Metnaro, Bacau, Los Palos, and Bobonara. I think they had some more up there. So I was the only Loggy Sergeant. I worked out of Dili with a few other people, 1 Lieutenant Colonel and 2 corporals and myself. And we would go out to the team sites from there or do our operations inside Dili. You know, I looked after the vehicles in the fleet. I'd do all the tour sites. You know, every fortnight or so I'd be driving from Dili by myself in a car with my black hat on, driving up to Los Palos to do the drop off the mail or do anything else. Go and stay with the team. So absolute legends. Once again, worked with some legends up there. A guy called Jimmy Mai, X1RAR infantry guy, a very, very good Indigenous leader in the community out there up in Queensland still, I believe. Work with some brilliant people like that. Yeah.
So was that for you, as you said, you mentioned a little bit earlier on in the potty that you're over in Bougainville, and then was that the first trip that you really understood the difference of the way of living being over in East Timor?
Yeah, definitely. That started seeing home. I was probably around 30 years of age, and it really started to sink in. And the connections. I actually took my grandfather's book with me, like not his personal book he wrote, but about his squadron. Took that with me, and took the absolute advantage that I was in my own Land Cruiser, driving around East Timor, and I'd be looking for spots to stop and try and find things. And I did, I found spots, I think, maybe my grandfather was here trying to gain those connections. I did a lot of work up at Dare, which is where they have the memorial. I went up there on weekends and repainted the memorial, and we got the plumbing, and I organised all my contacts through the embassy who did all the maintenance in town to come up and help build all that. gave feedback to the two second, fourth associations about turning it from a pool. It was called a pool of reflection, very dangerous, falling apart. They turned it into a garden and so forth. But it was a really humbling experience to be there and think. I used to sit in town where I lived and go dilly and go, my grandfather probably didn't even experience this because he was up there in the hills looking down at the Japanese down here. It was amazing. Yeah, it was an amazing experience. And it was a good year, hard year, probably very stressful year on my marriage because of the time away. So.
And that's a part of, as we were talking before we jumped on and started recording, mate, that's a part of the defence that we don't look at is the wives and the girlfriends back home, and it's not really spoken of. And as you said, it's the wives and the girlfriends that need the medals, mate.
Absolutely.
They deserve medals too.
We should be petitioning Canberra for any wives and spouses that stay with Army, Navy, or Air Force, long-term careers, especially over 20 years worth of marriage. 25 years of marriage to my wife Kelly. You met Kelly before. Yep. And that go through what we do, you don't realise the toll it has at home. And I always open up. Every time I do speaking, I do talk about that. Say we need to acknowledge our wives and partners at home. That sit there during a blackout, during a death on operations, not knowing anything for 48 hours. Stress kittens, right? They need an award.
Absolutely, mate. And it's high attrition rate of as I was saying, mate, and had Bergs on the podcast as well. He knows himself how many guys are still married after their service. It's
one of the few. I feel like you get a bit of a survivor syndrome, right? Going through that process and seeing some fantastic relationships just fall apart, which is it's sad. It's part of the sadness journey through defence that people don't talk about the good times, right? And all the other things, but it's one of those sad things that go through, and seeing some relationships go south, has an effect on everyone, and you feel sorry, especially your mates.
And you probably know heaps that have fallen apart and seemed, like at a shock that they're fallen apart. But it's, mate, it's part of, I know I've done over 110 podcasts now, mate, and I know most veterans say it's our families that's up, and the greatest sacrifice has been to their family, and you'd be the same, mate. Yeah,
going through it, it's hard. It's hard to get through that. It's a skill, to navigate that path through your career, and it's not something you can practice. That skill, it's something you got to work on every day. Right to now, we've been together. Well, married 25, together 30. We still have to work on it every week, right? Got an 18-year-old son now. Still got to work on it every week, looking after him and changing our approach and being aligned. Do we get it right every time? Absolutely not.
But mate, that's life, isn't it? But the good thing is, mate, you're still together, you're still pushing forward, and mate, it's a credit to both of you. And I'll plug Kel. She's an absolute. They always say it, mate. Behind every great man, there's an even better woman, and she's a good woman, mate. So.
This gets overquoted, but it's true. She's the boss, mate. Around here, I'm definitely not the boss around here. Walk through this door, I'm taking orders, not giving them.
Well, mate, Berg said exactly the same thing. He said, "Yep, don't worry, the missus, don't worry, she's the boss." So.
Probably one of the keys we could take out of this. Anyone want to take anything out of this is make sure your wife's assertive and has a say, because it might help you get through.
Absolutely. So, mate, you come back from that second deployment and just a really rewarding but tough deployment, and then what's happening next in your career?
From that time period back, I went back to Sydney. Really, I was out of posting slot. So when I spoke to my career advisor, who was an ex-artillery guy as well, Sid Bracewell, a bit of a legend in the community, he said, "Look, I've got this slot at DNSDC for you for 12 months. It's not really your trade, but you can fit in there. You can be assistant fleet manager for weapons under 81 mil. I said, "Okay, as long as it's 12 months, because after that, I want to go back to A Battery or somewhere else." He goes, "Yep, done." So I turned up at the Defence National Storage and Distribution Centre for a placeholder, backfilling a lady who was on maternity leave. And I have the first briefing from the Commando, which was a RAFI, and then their pseudo sort of RSM, it was a WO1. And the typical silly question they ask, who doesn't want to be here? Well, I'm one of those guys who go, that's me. I don't want to be here. And he goes, well, tough luck, you're here for 3 years. And I said, well, I've actually got a deal, sir. I'm only staying here for 12 months. And we'll see about that, Sergeant Smith. I went, no worries, sir, we'll see about that. 2 months later, I was ringing another mate who was over at A Battery at the time, absolute legend, David Natini. He's now the RSM 13 Brigade. I said, Dave, get me on a para course. He goes, yeah, done, mate. Got you on the next course coming up. Spoke to Sid down at Career Advisors. We're getting you done. 12 months later, I'm posted out, heading to A Battery with my wings, walking past this guy going, I told you, sir, I'd be out of here in 12 months. I think that set us off on a long-standing grudge. He lives in Newcastle now, and I end up working with him later on in life. And I think that grudge never dropped.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Well,
mate, some people can't let them go. So.
Well, I didn't want to be there, mate. They tell you to be honest, right?
100%. Honesty is the best policy, mate. So, mate, talk me through. I want to talk about that because I know that there's the famous maroon beret as para guys, and I know 3RAR had and put a bit of a stick on all the other guys that we've got our maroon berets and we're proud of it.
Yep.
Mate, talk me through that because you're not infantry, you're not, and talk me through that process and also. What does that mean to you, mate? Because I know you probably were shitting yourself, weren't you? Oh,
absolutely. I'm not a naturally brave person. I've probably assimilated the army training a lot over life, and it's like step into the breach, take a big breath, and do what you need to do. So when I went to A Battery, it was at a time period when it was probably at the maturity and the apex of the airborne battle group, which the centre of that is, everyone knows 3RAR. But 3RAR was the centrepiece of a whole airborne battle group at that stage, right? And I turned up at A Battery, did my course. By the time you do your first jump with the battalion, the CO of 3RAR gave me my certificate, giving me the entitlement to wear the Airborne Battle Group wings, commonly known as the 3RAR wings. And at the same time, A Battery was also authorised to wear the maroon beret. And that was for everybody. But the additional piece was, being able to get those wings, and which I never thought I'd never go to 3RAR and wear those wings. But it's normal. There's plenty of mates that are in 3RAR that were cooks and Ramey guys. They all got the wings. They wear 3RAR wings, and I probably dovetailed it off a little bit later on when I deployed to East Timor on my second trip. I was deployed with 3RAR.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And that, mate, because as you know from some of the guys, really, you had your SAS where they had their wings, and was 3 really was your that. So there was. I know a lot of guys talk about prestige of having that maroon beret, and you're one of them as well, mate. Yep. And do you remember your jumps and how?
I remember my first jump. I do remember my first jump. One, I was packing it like nothing else. I'm sure everyone did. Well, not everyone. A majority of us did, because you have that conversation back at the mess. And I remember on the first stick they went round, we had a young guy who stalled at the door. And they gave him the brief put out, and then they sat him down. Then we did another circle. When I went out the door, I didn't have any problems getting out the door. It was your first jump, clean fatigue, which means no combat equipment. Going out the door, I didn't get panicky until about the last 60 metres, and I was looking down. I'm on the rise, and I go, so is this riser here to go that way, or is this? My whole head's going nuts about which way to pull on a riser. Well, I pulled on the wrong freaking riser. And as I pulled on this riser, it sped me up the wrong direction, going backwards. I don't know how many knots. I remember the DS on the ground looking at me, and I looked over, and as I went down, I landed in long grass and just went, bang on my heels, bang on my ass, bang on my head, and knocked myself out.
Oh, right.
For a split second, I was out, just full on stars, like getting hit like by a Fijian front row. I was like, whoa, and sort of woke up, and then by that time, you're not supposed to do it. I was panicking because my chute's still blowing, so I released the cape wall, which is a no-no.
Yeah, right.
And this boat, you've released the cape wall, it collapses the canopy, because it releases one side of the cape wall. So I wrapped it up and I put it together, and I started walking out of the grass, and your DS is critiquing you. It's typical military critique. How do you think you went in this? I think your exit was good. You did all your all-round obs. You called out. You did all the right calls. I didn't see you landing, but you walked past. I went, okay. I didn't think I did too well. You go, you're a good mate. You're walking. Take it over to the rally point. Next jump starts in an hour. That was it.
Wow.
That was my welcome to MC1 parachuting static line.
Wow, that's loose. And
I'll shit myself after that.
Yeah.
It got worse.
all right.
Because after that experience, I thought, what am I going to do in the second one? I totally fucked that one. What the fuck am I going to do in this one? I went around back to the hangar. The guy who refused to jump, he'd already taken him away, because they take him away instantly because they fear spreads. So they removed him. I went around the corner of the shed and just let on the door going, what the hell am I doing? He said, all right, grab your gear, we're going back out. Okay, all right. And after the second jump, it all became okay. I got better with it. I still shut my eyes when I exited, but I got better.
That's wow, because I know a lot of guys, mate, and you talk to some that serious injuries, mate, have happened, and I know I've spoke to a couple of boys in SF that, like para, that one guy actually stuffed his leg, that broke his leg, that ended up discharging. So did you lose any off the, apart from that guy that couldn't jump? Did you lose any through injury on that one that you can remember?
Lots of injuries. There were some silly rules on it, which if you applied them today, you go, why was that a rule? So to qualify on your last jump, it's combat equipment, full CE, night jump, sim doors. So both para doors on the side, sim doors. Mm-hmm. And to qualify, you need to get yourself to the rally point. So if you land and break your leg on the last one and you crack your siloam stick and the kilo has to come and get you, you don't pass the course. You've got to come back and do that jump. And I've seen guys that I watched one guy who must have totally, I don't think he fractured his ankle. He might have just totally torn the ligaments. He was in pain, still getting his gear on because he can't get assistance. Got his gear on, got his pack, got his parachute on the top, taking it to the rally point, just sliding himself along the ground to get there. I go, you're right, mate. He goes, nah, I'm not coming back, mate. I'm passing. And he dragged himself in the medic cart, and then he dropped his ass at the rally point, ticking the box, pass. And I thought, that's a crazy rule. And I thought, thank God I didn't break anything, because I wasn't light. I'm not light now. And I was right into my gym back then. I was probably just on 100 kilo.
Yeah, right.
Which was... and I'm not tall. I'm only 5'11". So I thought, wow, this is, and I used to just spud in like a bag of potatoes. Anyone go, are you good at parachuting? And go, mate, I land like an absolute bag of spuds, but I seem to walk away from it all.
Yeah, right.
Every time.
Wow. And is it a 2-week course, or what is it?
2 weeks, yeah. I was the only sergeant on that course, or the only sergeant to pass the test today, because you go and do a fitness test there, and it's basically just a bit of a souped up basic fitness test, but with a bit more, right? So they got the heaves to a cadence and the push-ups to a cadence, and you run in a certain time. There was probably 6 or 7 sergeants there when I started. At the end of the day, I was the only sergeant. Bunch of young Louis on the course, and then me as a sergeant, and then a bunch of corporals and below.
Yeah, right.
So when everyone went back to their respective messes at night, the EOs would go that way, the diggers would go over to their mess. I went back to the sergeant's mess with all the instructors, because they were all sergeants. So I had to drink with them. So I probably learnt a lot about myself going to the mess with those guys. They're all really experienced. All 3 RR guys, a couple of Commando guys there as well, and a couple of artillery guys there.
Yeah, right. So you do that, you pass, mate. You get your wings, and then you mentioned you deploy to East Timor again in 2006 with 3 RR.
With 3, so that's when things started really ramping up, right? We'd been out of East Timor for a couple of years, and then we gave them that full year of space, and that's when the Falintel pulled their weapons, went down, and decided to take on the police. And you've got to understand the dynamic in East Timor, the culture. There's a lot of blood debt. So the police that are there that stayed post-Interfet, all right, a lot of them were police officers underneath the previous regime. Well, the Falintel guys that are now in the East Timorese Army, 1st Battalion in particular, 2nd Battalion was more new kids. 1st Battalion, well, a lot of them were mountain guerrillas who had a lot of blood debt. So they didn't like the police. So eventually that heated up, and it all kicked off again in 2006, and we had to go back. I'll tell you the difference. East Timor in my first tour was considered warlike. My second tour, it wasn't. It was a lot more violent on my second tour. There was a lot going on. So it was the first time we went in with the air bridge, flew in. We already had a couple of APCs that flew in the first aircraft. They rolled them out the back. Being that I had a lot of dilly knowledge, because a lot of the guys before that time had served up at the border, Ausbat. I never did Ausbat, but I'd done a lot of dilly time. So I knew the streets, I knew everywhere to go, I knew where all the contractors were, I knew where all the embassies were.
Yep.
So they said, hey, jump in the back of an APC. I needed to take us to where these nuns live. I said, no, I can get you there. I'll take you the best way. We'll go down, we'll follow the creeks, you'll follow the rivers. If you know Dili, the rivers are basically roads anyhow until it rains. Everyone drives down the rivers. And I took them down there, and that was the first time in Dili I'd heard gunfire. So there was some pretty good gunfire going on. There was a lot of riots. A couple of the APCs had already been mollytoffed, cocktailed. I'm sitting there loading up. I'm sitting there next to the Cav guy. I think he was 3-4 Cav. The crew commander, and we're loading the nuns out, and the ones that wanted to get out, we're putting them in the back of the vehicle, and just as we're sitting there, they're taking their time, and I'm sitting there next to the crew commander, and he goes, yeah, how you doing? And then he just heard the doosh, 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 doosh. I went, wow. He goes, crew, he's like, everyone get in. That would penetrate us, we're getting out of here. I said, what is it? He goes, that sounds pretty heavy, mate. Let's get out of here. So we loaded up, got out of town there, but that's the first time I'd heard gunfire on the street. It's a Dili, And I'm sure the boys that did Ineffet had a lot more encounters where it was quite messy. But when I got to East Timor under UNTAE, it's pretty benign.
Right.
It wasn't the most, it had its risks. But 2006, when they went back, non-warlike service, there's probably a lot more going on, especially those first few weeks. It was a bizarre place. I remember going, we were based out of the heliport, which is odd because on the first tour of the heliport, that's where I played touch football. And now we're set up there as a battalion group and it's a helipad. So that was warlike when I played touch. And then over here it was like I'm full body armoured up. And I remember we had to do clearances because all the weapons had been raided from the army. And I went with one of my mates who was X3, Ramey guy, Fletch. And he was a captain, Ramey captain by that stage. And we had to go check one of the police stations. And it's horrific, still gives me chills to today. Like, it was horrific. We went in there and cleared it. We found all the empty Glock cases. There's nothing, but the rooms were terrible, and I don't know how to share this. Like, the gravity of what went on there hit me. You went into a room and you just seen blood smeared all over the walls. You seen, I don't know if you might have to edit this out later, but there's girls' underwear that's been cut and thrown, and blood everywhere. There's obviously been sexual assaults and all this sort of stuff in the room, and I left that room, probably that's where I started becoming a bit of a different person about, gave you think, not all humanity's great, this is shit. What's happened here, where are the people, are there any survivors? And just, it probably took me a couple of days to get over. I've talked to Fletch about that before. He's sort of retired now, but he's at Army headquarters as well. So,
Because how old are you at that point?
Early 30s, yeah.
And that, as you say, mate, that's confronting to anybody.
Yeah.
And at that stage, you'd been in, you'd been in a few years.
Yeah.
That, and you still, I'm sitting across, and that still cuts you up.
It hurts. Yeah, you feel helpless. Like, where the fuck were we a couple of days to stop this shit, right? Yeah, it was.
That feeling of uselessness.
Yeah. Where were we to do this, right? And we missed our opportunity to do the right thing, or we hesitated to go, because it was a bit of a head spin time for me as well. In my private life, Kelly was 8 months pregnant. I was called out in the middle of the night with 3 RAR battle group for ready battalion group. So in the middle of the night, she's 8 months pregnant. I'm in the middle of the night, drifted off, ended up in Townsville at some stage doing a force prep, ready to go into wherever. Everyone knew where we were going. It was in the papers. And Kelly's at home getting ready to give birth to a baby, at the same time. Like I said, wife's need a medal.
Yeah, absolutely. And that deployment over there, was that when Alfredo Renato was running?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that was when he was running around. Yeah,
Alfredo, met him.
Yeah, right.
Did meet him. I remember being on. So Admin Company. I was back with Admin Company 3, and we had the heliport, right? And we had a Bravo company up the hills, and we were a bit of a mixed battalion. We had a company from one RAR, and we had people from everywhere because numbers were hard, and the war was going on already in Afghanistan. We were ramping up.
Yeah.
And I remember I was sitting out there on picket with, about to replace picket with, I think it was Jimmy Edwards, and I said, he's looking at a guy across the road in camouflage uniform waving at him. They got on the radio, that was him. He's across the road. This is before they had to go catch him the second time. This is when he was across the road.
Yeah,
Walked across the road, and he was basically surrendering. He was sitting in the house across the road, from the checkpoint waving at us. So he went in the first time, and then I think it all fell apart, and he went back to the hills, and that's when the boys had to go chase him down. That's when the operators, I think it was 4RA.
Yeah, 4RA.
Went out in the hills and chased him, and
right.
that's when I caught up with people like talk about amazing people I've worked with and become friends with over the years. People like Pete Rutland. All right, so I've known Pete from courses and training over the years, and then deployments. He's that one guy that has got a lot of charisma. You just knew who he was, and an absolute professional at everything.
Yep.
Yeah, he was good. So,
mate, previous guest on the podcast as well, mate. Some of these names you're throwing up, mate. It's amazing that 6 degree of separation that people I know that you know really well have been on the podcast as well, mate. It's just a small world.
I think I was talking to you before we went in. It's about when I was in artillery, that's a bubble, right? And if you stay with your one corps, you kind of know just those people. It's like the boys in SOCOM; they just in SOCOM most of their careers, especially if they're a SFDRS guy, right? They just went straight to the command. Less, people's like legends like H and that who went up 1RAR and then became operators. They had that background. When I went over and changed to be a loggy, and then I never really went to anything. I never ended up with big CISBs or anything like that. Maybe because I was a male and I had that background, I ended up at the units, right? Different units. We are lucky enough that we're small numbers in each unit at Loggies that we get to meet a diverse piece of army. So we'll go from a SIG unit to an SF unit to an armoured unit, back to a different, maybe a transport unit after that. We get to know everybody. So we're quite, when we go places, they go, oh, what's your main unit? I said, I've had lots. It just depends what time period. How do you know that guy? Oh, that was from that trip. Yeah. How do you know that guy? Oh, well, how do you know H? Oh, well, I live with H in Kabul. Yeah. He was my roommate. How do you know these guys?
It's just privilege, as you say. Privilege
legends.
To me. And
no one's special here on this seat, but I got to work with some of the most amazing and talented people in the Australian Defence Force for my era. I would look back at that era, and probably my grandfather would probably said the same. He always said he was nothing special and talked about it, but he worked with amazing people,
and they just come from all walks of life, mate. And,
unassuming, right? But I love this one because I worked in SOCOM for many years as a support staff, and people go, oh, what are the SF guys that look like? I said, you wouldn't know if you're standing next to them, mate. They're very unassuming, very good at what they do, and they don't openly advertise it, mate. No. And he said, you would think it, I'd show you one and you go, nah, bullshit. And I go, no, that guy there. Absolutely.
Mate, Bergs is a great example of that.
Yeah, Bergs
look
great.
Look at him, mate. He's 5'3", and
he's a weapon.
Yeah, he's a weapon, mate. You walk past him and you think, that dude, really?
That's right, mate.
That's what they're like. They don't seek the limelight, mate. They just, and they're just humble guys and girls that just go about their day-to-day business and, mate, they're good at what they do.
Spent a lot of time with especially more too than Perth guys, and unassuming, absolute professionals, get on their jobs. Easy to work with because compared to the rest of the army, as a loggy, you're constantly dealing with what I call like the adult children with weapons, mate, all the time. You end up in SOCOM, you've never met so many people who come in and help you with your plan and go, mate, we want you to succeed because we want to succeed. That never happens in bigger army. In SOCOM, you'd have that your team leader at a corporal or a sergeant come in and go, right, this is what I need from you. How can we get this? I want to do this. How can I enable it? I'll send my boys. We'll fix this up because we want to succeed. That mindset that when I worked with them made my job easier. And because they were so detailed, so planned, so organised. Where compared to a big army, they turn up at an event and go, have you guys organised everything for us? Where's our ammo? SOCOM guys, they'd be down there weeks before the activity, showing the plan. This is what we've got in ACMS for our planning for ammo. Can we get this? Can I change that to this style of ammunition? Where's the delivery? I'll help you pick it up and we'll make sure it moves. They are there and selected. They go through their selection process, and I worked at SFTC. They go through that selection process for a reason. You can see the product that comes out. They're the most helpful guys I've ever worked with. You're right.
And it probably, we'll get into it later on, mate, and what you're doing now. It probably helped you post main full-time army career. Helped you going forward in what you do now.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Yeah.
And, mate, so your second trip, how are you mentally at this point? Like, are you that? You just mentioned what happened.
Yeah,
how are you mentally?
I was a little. Yeah, it was. I think I was at a point where I overestimated my own ability to my own mental capacity, right? And I thought, yeah, and you just push on like everyone does.
Compartmentalise it.
You park it away, push it away, and at the same time, like I was very lucky enough that I was offered the fly home. My battery commander at the time was a guy called Damien Hill. He's still around, Brigadier Hill. He and a bunch of other people in the Padre came around and said, look, we've got 20 expecting fathers here. Who came out on the Ready Battalion group. He said, we're going to get you home. But the trick is, you can't come back. I went, that's okay. I've been here before. It's cool. I'll go home. I want to see my son. So I got on a flight out of Dili, down at Commando Airport. Eventually did like 24 hours of travelling. I don't think I slept. Got home, turned up home. That night we went straight to the hospital. Kelly was having a C-section because it's the only way I could guarantee that I could see the birth of my child, and we went through the process. My son Jet was born. The nurses were awesome. They let me sleep actually at the hospital, in the private hospital, which I don't normally do. Scared the hell out of my mum because she thought I was still in East Timor when she came in to see Kelly. And by the time he was born, 4 days later, I had to be back in Darwin to help the battalion get their equipment across on HMAS Manura.
Yep.
And the QM at the time was a guy called Noel Allport, bit of a legend. Rest in peace now. He passed away from cancer a few years ago. And he goes, yep, just help us get this stuff ready and then we'll get you back on leave and you can go and see your son. I'm driving around Darwin, loading stuff up, getting stuff down to the docks. He goes, oh, you got your packing stuff with you? On the phone. Yeah, mate. He goes, get on board HMAS Manura. You're escorting in the battalion's equipment. All right. I wasn't going back. He goes, no, you're going back. All right. Back on a ship. I was the sole embarked forces on HMAS Manura. So the only embarked forces on the ship. Cruised in, got a 3-day cruise over or a 2-day cruise over to East Timor, came back into the port, turned up back at the heliport, said to my boss, I'm back. And he goes, how the fuck are you back here, mate? I'm going, the QM sent me in, mate. He put me on a boat full of gear. I just delivered all the Land Rovers, mate. And he's like, right, I didn't fucking authorise that. I'm going, I don't know who's giving the orders around here, boss, but I'm here. So just let me know what I'm doing. Ended up staying another few months.
Wow. Yeah. How's that on Kel with
hard? Once again,
with
give the wives a medal. I got home, I think he was 4 months old by the time I got home.
Wow.
It was good. I then was told by the time I got home from East Timor, you're getting a respite posting if you want it. What do you want? I said, we want to go to Newcastle. Kelly's a newer girl. Parents are here. Everyone's here. So my career advisor, Sid Bracewell, again, still at the time, lines it up. I got a posting up here as Carter staff to Adamstown, Bully Court Barracks, as a sergeant, as a training sergeant, and got a small respite. I thought, this would be great. A couple of years, we'll stay around Newcastle, work out what we're going to do. Before I'd even got home from East Timor, I'd received an email from my new RSM asking me to go and start force preparation for the Solomon Islands in February of that next year. So I come home for Christmas, worked out that I was going to the Sullies, and it was quite a historical moment. Once again, just average guy caught in historical moments. It was the first Army Reserve contingent to go solely under their own command, deployed overseas since the Second World War. So it was rotation 12 of the Solomon Islands push, Ramsey.
Yep.
And I had a CO that was a reservist, had an RSM that was a reservist, but they needed 7 ARA, Australian Regular Army staff, for critical roles. And the RQ was one of those roles. So myself and another guy, Mick Powell, he was the corporal at the time, the 2 ARA guys on the headquarters there in the Sully. So we went for another 4 months, and I think it came back to it was about 8-9 months old.
So was that 07 or 08 that you were over there?
I think it was 07. I'm pretty sure it was 07, rotation 12.
Yeah, right. And so, mate, as you say, you joined...
I should know that because Jet was born in 06. Yeah.
There you go.
There you go.
And Kel's looking at us going, yeah, you should remember that.
I should remember that, no? Yeah, it was 07.
So you join in 89, mate, and as you say, this is the period you get Bougainville in the early part of your career. Then you deploy for the second trip to East Timor. Then you go again in 06. Then 07, you deploy to the Solis. Like, this is where it's starting to, like, I've heard from a lot of guys that if you're in that time, there was trips going everywhere. Like,
it's just ramping up.
It's just ramping up, and Afghanistan's going crazy, Iraq's going crazy. And what was what was the role for the reserve guys over there in the Solis in 07? What were they actually doing?
So they were they were reinforcing the police there. You know, it was an ongoing situation after the AFP constable over there, I can't recall his name, was shot. Mm-hmm. So they put an army presence in there, a company group, running around double IMVs, which is the Land Rovers with the sides.
Yep.
The reinforce the police and give that extra security. It was, and the posture was non-aggressive. So they made much of the grunts discontent, especially the reserve grunts, and brilliant guys from Charlie Company, 2nd 17th Battalion over here. They wanted their own Afghanistan, but they really didn't. They got told, sling your weapons and hold them behind you and all this sort of stuff. It was a different sort of environment. It was good, but back in the islands, very similar to Bougainville. This time I had a weapon, right? The things we went around unloaded, but you're still armed in case that the police needed that escalation. But it was a good trip for the reservists to do, right? They had their own command. I'll tell you what, one of the things when I was working with the reserves in town, you got this thing at Carter Staff and Reserve units. All right, you're just here for 3 years, mate. We'll fuck you off and we'll get somebody else and we'll change all that back in the next time. Because I went overseas with a lot of them, I've made friends with a lot of people in Newcastle. They're all pure reservists and a lot of reservists up here that I'm sort of included in the group. And it sort of broke down the barriers because I was one of them because I deployed with them, right? So I've got a lot of mates that are still here.
Mate,
Some I went to Afghanistan with later, like Ian Downey, the armourer.
They still wear the same badge, mate.
Absolutely,
Doesn't matter whether they're a choco or not, mate. They still wear the same uniform.
Some
as
of
you,
them
mate.
are way the skills. When people, it's a bit of a punchline. Oh, the army reserve guys bring different skills. Well, when you're over there, they actually do. My armourer is also a tradesman. The other guy's also a carpenter and a plumber. The skill sets they have are phenomenal. They're not just we need to do this. Oh, we'll just go get Jono from one section. No, he's a builder. We'll get him we'll go put one of those up in 5 minutes. Like they do have that blended skill sets, and hats off to them. They do it in their own time, right? We used to give them a lot of. I was never a reservist, pure reservist. I came through the army system, ARA, and we used to get told, basically indoctrinated, to treat them like shit. But when you get to know them, you think, wow, they actually do a lot, and they're here. They're here working on a Tuesday night. They've already worked 12 hours in the pits and the mines. They're giving people, right? They bring a lot to the table.
Mate, it's something that we spoke about before we started the podcast, mate. A lot of chocos, mate, and there's a lot of crap that goes with the Defence Force medal, mate.
Yeah.
Mate, it's one of the only, as I said to you, mate, only 2% of Australians will ever wear that medal. So
hand in hand, the long service medal. Yep. I've said to you before, people go, they look at your ribbons and stuff, and they'll start pointing out things. I always point them towards the Parramatta medal. I say that one there is one that I say I truly earned. All right, that is hours and hours of boredom, hours and hours of activity.
Yeah. And
the rest of them, I just did the time period, did my job, and I was in a different postcode.
That's right. And mate, you, as you say, like, that Parramatta medal, mate, it takes 15 years of blood, sweat and tears, mate, to get that medal, and it's a good thing you don't follow Parramatta, but you're manly.
I don't want to be that sad. I want some friends.
That's a bit of a dig to Parramatta supporters, but
Tegan Tippett will be listening to this, mate.
Yes,
she's a Parramatta fan. I feel for her.
Love you, Teagues. You're an absolute love you.
Good to give her a shout out, mate, too. She's a legend.
Yeah, she is a legend, and she's a good friend of mine, and she's actually coming on the potty as well. And I had her husband on the potty, so yeah, mate, he's an ex-3RAR and now current firefighter, and two amazing people, mate. So Teagues, absolute legend. Nice. So, mate, I want to talk about Solis, and then. So you come back from that trip, mate, and then in 2009, mate, you deploy as part of the SOTG Rotation 12, Task Force 66. Talk me through this deployment.
It's a bit of a journey to get there. I was at Adamstown working there, and I'd just been promoted to WO2. And I was sitting there and I was looking at posting slots, and I got a call from the RSM of SFTC. He was basically shopping for a new RQ. And the SF training centre, which was at Singleton at that time, not Holsworthy. And I was here locally. And I remember basically getting called up by him and getting a phone interview for a job. And it's the first time in the army I just hadn't been told this is where you're going. And he's like, yeah, I just want to talk to you, mate. I talked to him for about an hour on the phone. After that, he said, look, sent me some emails and I was sent off to do some psych tests and medicals and a few other things that they had prerequisites, cog tests and a few other things for SOCOM. A couple of weeks later, he goes, yep, mate, here's your post in order SFTC. So it was a kind of weird entry to change from regular army and sitting down here at 8th Brigade at the time, Reserve Brigade, to go back to the army. And I was lucky enough it was, the army considered it a same posting, even though it's an hour out that way. It's over 100 kilometres. They considered it a back-to-back posting here, and I ended up at Singleton, commuted a lot and stayed out there a lot. So I ended up in SOCOM there, did my SOFIC courses with them, all right. So SOFIC is Special Operations Induction course for people who aren't shooters, operators, and it's all the training's delivered by operators. So they'll teach us. SOFIC 1 is base operations, how to walk, talk, and what does the command look like. SOFIC 2 is base operations, so how to work inside, on deployment, but inside an operating base like Camp Russell, sort of thing. And SOFIC 3 is how to work on operations and be able to walk and talk and do things with them in their environment and not get in the way outside the wire.
So with that, do you have the option as like support to do? I know I spoke to a couple of guys from the regiment that they could go Cat A or Cat B, or could you go and do your
You
selection?
could go for selection. By the time I got that part of my career, the only commandos when I joined up were one commando, the reservists. The thing in Sydney, and they had one company and two company down in Melbourne. I probably missed my window between injuries and every other thing that I wanted to go for that, and my career was going off on another path. But given the option to be able to go out and serve the command, it kind of dawned on me. I thought, oh, right, I'm in that environment, what can I do here? And I thought, well, I'm not going to be going for a selection or anything like that. I'm way too old and too broken. I'm probably not motivated enough, but I still want to be involved, right? So I just stuck into it, just did the best job I could, being a support member in there. And, the command, someone gave me the stats on the command, the numbers. We represent, half the command, support staff, right? So it's the Special Operations Command. We've got all the boys that earn the badges, earn the berets and the badges. That's weird. In Australia, we earn berets. Most of the other countries earn their badge. But, and then you've got the support staff as well. But you're not under the stringent requirements those boys go through for their selection. But you're still under the microscope, right? They want to make sure, are you a good, I remember H saying it to me once, just making sure you're a good cunt, and you work hard, and you do the right thing for us. Because I've seen people turn up, and it's true, the myth is true, that I've seen people turn up in command, within 12 months they've got a posting cycle out.
Yeah, right.
You're just not the right fit for them. And that's what I think when I went through the psych test, are you the right fit for that environment? Regimental people generally didn't survive. I'm not very reggie.
Yeah, okay. And so do you have to, because having support staff, like being attached to so command and all that, do you guys have to maintain, there's a minimum standard of fitness, like it's higher than the regular, do you have to do that?
We didn't have a mandated requirement. So when it came to the SF tests that they did every year, we had to attempt them, not pass them. Right?
Okay.
And they'll throw that. But if you attempted and did everything with them, we do the webbing run and all the other things they do in their basic fitness, and during selection courses we run along. But there's no requirement for us to pass. Albeit, I'm running next to Craig or those guys. They have a requirement to pass, right? And I used to love it if I could beat one of them in, I'd let them know about it. Be absolutely let them know. I think there's one or two people I used to beat on the webbing run, like the 3.2 and that. I'd let them know. So, mate, you've been on the donuts too much. You just let a Kiwi beat you, mate. It's like nothing more insulting. And then they're like, the next one, I think they just go away and work, because they work out to make sure they smash me.
So do you wear the blue beret? Or
when I left A Battery, that was the last time we cashed in the maroon beret. Sits there on the shelf and keep it for Anzac days, and in Australian tradition, you roll back over to your blue beret, which is the beret I have on the shelf is the same beret I got at Kapuka.
Yeah, right.
And I had it in artillery, so it's got holes from my artillery badge and holes from my ordnance badge.
Yeah,
so,
right.
You put your blue beret on.
So talk to me through that, mate. You go on rotation 12, and as part of Task Force 66, and Mate, was this trip one of the toughest trips for you?
No, not really. This trip was one of those runs out of SOHQ because I was not. So it was SFTC, and we used to call ourselves the South Florida Tennis Club. Mm-hmm. All right, so we didn't have that pointy end part of the SOCOM. They run what was called. They worked out it was really good to run what was called force insertion and extraction groups, mm-hmm. which is basically anyone from a pay rep to a psych to a QE to even some of the shooters who come over and do different things, help an FE get in mm-hmm. and help an FE get a force element get out.
Yep.
So we just surge a bunch of positions like loggies and pay and different things that go in. So I was part of that. We went over to enable that handover, and so we spent 3 months there with a normal tour for the operators. A lot of them did 4-month rotations. For loggies, it's 6 months over there. We used to have the CSTs. So we'd go over and we'd surge the capacity of the CST team, the Combat Services Support Team, mm-hmm. to help the FEs get in and out. And then after that, we'd rotate back out. So the first one was at Camp Russell.
Yep.
Doing that job, helping the units get in and out. Besides sitting, we never really left the wire. We didn't go outside. Camp Russell, we went out wherever we needed to go. And the most aggressive thing we've probably seen was, everyone got 107 rockets. Things coming out at night, but I think I ran for the first one, and then I got sick of the operators laughing at me because I ran out to the bunker. I got used to just sitting in bed and letting them go past. I was there for the famous gold top incident.
Yeah, right.
The Mark 19 delinking incident. So I was on the range that day. I won't name him, but next to the Ramey operator who delinked a Mark 19 and loaded it into an M79, then fired it right and blew the M79 in half in his hand. I'm sitting about the same distance from him, loading up my 9mm, and he blew it in half. The gold top rolled down the hill, the barrel flew off that way, and he went backwards with a big blood streaking down his neck, down his face here, and decided that he could delink a Mark 19, which has a range of around 2,000 metres, and a net explosive quantity quite different to an M79, which is about 400 from memory.
Yeah.
You wonder why it blew up in his face. So that's probably more for him. It was just like, I remember going and visiting him at the hospital. I said, "Glad you're all right, but God, you're going to cop it from the rest of the Brotherhood and Ramey, mate, for doing that." God, poor bloke.
Yeah, what was the thought process going through that day,
I use that for safety all the time. It's the unconscious bystander, right? You see somebody do something and you go, "Oh, mate, they're fine," and he's probably doing something. He's purely got a theory behind this is going to be okay.
Yep.
And I walked past it, and a few other people walked past it, and just went, "Nah, mate, he's a fitter armourer. He'll be right." And just that's that.
She'll be right, mate.
She'll be right. And then thinking, the unconscious observer of an accident, that's all good. He knows what he's doing. When somebody really, it should have been me as well. What are you doing, mate?
Yeah.
At first, I thought he was just going to delink it, and then I was, I'd never done it, but the boys were telling me you can do a single load into the Mark 19 and fire one round. I went, oh, okay. And then it went boom. I just remember the lab that was next to me with the young digger with his seat up and his hat just going, dropping down inside the hatch. And I just went, right. Yeah. Got in a bit of trouble from ADFIS that day because it was getting dark and it was up in, those that are in, up at Tarrancott.
Yep.
You go at the firing bay where everyone does their shooting and the cars come up and test their guns before they go out. And it's right out the edge. You need, we got told, don't stay out there at night, get back in the cars and come home. I thought, it's getting a bit dark. I threw away the whole principle, didn't preserve the scene. We packed everything up and put it in the truck, came back. So I did get my ass kicked by AFS. Why did you break the scene? You go, because we didn't want to sit out there at night, mate.
Yeah. You told us to come home.
Yeah, it was a big deal. So the Gold Top incident is quite well known across Task Force 66. It was an amazing day. But those sort of things. The whole day before that was sitting there. I've never fired so many 66s and 84s in my life because I just, they bring ammunition up that was going to be disposed of or couldn't be fired.
Yeah.
And we just sit there and clearing it, doing range shoots. So
I actually spoke to. I actually think it was Huck actually that he had to fire stuff off the back of the ships and he just because it was all this cache of ammo and everything and couldn't bring it back into Australia and he just said by the end of it, mate, he said you got over it. You're just firing and firing and
we
firing.
We had pallets of 66, right? And, before I went to Afghanistan, I'd fired one I'd fired one of the prac rounds of 66 when I went through Tully.
Yep.
So I went through Tully with 103 battery, and I'd fired one live one in my whole career. I'll go over there. We've got 3 pallets of them. We're sitting there. We got so bored. We were putting them up on a bit of an angle to see how far they could go before they ran out of fuel, then dropped.
Yeah, right.
So we're just firing them up at an angle. Oh, yeah, it is about 400 metres. Bored, just absolutely bored.
Because you're just doing it. That was your time. Yeah, wow.
Sitting there with pet flares, just firing flares because we had to get rid of them. Yeah, the whole day. That was the day. This probably goes to the complacency. That was the day that the gold top incident happened, right at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Because I was loading up for the drive to go back. I just cleaned my pistol and I was like, oh, we'll get out of it. And then boom.
Far out.
The gold
wild, top. Mate, wild. And so you have that trip and then come back and obviously get to spend a bit of time with Kel and Jet and get home and then what's happening in the next part of where are you in Commando?
I was still at Commando at SFTC. We decided at that stage I was about to be posted, and I was pretty well slotted to go to one company at Mossman. Mm-hmm. And I think I was just getting really tired, and Kelly and I were talking, we need to stay here in Newcastle. We just wanted to stay. So I put my discharge in 2011, and my XO at the time, who was a digger with me in one field regiment back in the day before he went to RMC and before he went to Perth. He was Barrow qualified Perth. Mm-hmm. Steve Plant, absolute legend of a man. I put in my discharge and he said, yep, don't worry, mate. We've already lined up. We've got a spot for you here at SFTC. We just created a reserve position for you. So I left there, came down and worked a public service job here in Newcastle at Adamstown Barracks, just doing corporate governance and compliance. Boring stuff. Very easy work. Did that for a while, and I just remember, it sort of brought me to my next deployment, right? That I would never thought would happen. The next I had 2 more deployments, even though I discharged in 2011. I went to the reserves. I stayed in SOCOM as a reservist, working for SFTC, and as the J4 at the time, I think Colonel Stone told me, it was like, you're a good asset because you're not going to cost me anything if I ever send you anywhere. And that's how I end up on deployments, because I had all the qualifications as a loggie, had all the weapons, I had my M4, Mag 58, MP5, all those sort of things. Yeah. Not that I ever carried an MP5. I went to a range shoot a couple of times. But I had all those quals, right? And then it sort of led to a few things coming after that.
Yeah, well, mate, let's crack in. As you mentioned, 2012, mate, your next trip back is...
Another fire.
Yeah, so let's talk about that.
I must have done all right on the first one, and I got another one. And we had a couple of new people that were in the reserve, but, legends, from my side of corps and training, who joined the command. But they'd never been overseas with the command, didn't have those relationships. So one of the reasons I went into back, the quarterback, one of them, he was a WO1, the quarterback him on his first trip, which was great. Put things in perspective. It was for work-wise, it wasn't really much of a change to the last fire. Stayed on the base there, worked with amazing people. I don't know if you know Rose Ball. She was the pay rep at SFTC, long-term friend still. Worked with those people. Probably a bit of a sad trip, and it really levelled me a bit in response to the guy that I took over had been out for a long time, come back in reserves and never been in with arms corps units. He'd been a CISB sort of guy and different things most of his life. And that was the mid-trip that we lost Blaine Diddams, all right, which was, and people talk about the emotional shock, I can't imagine for his teammates and everything else that were there, but the whole quiet, the emotion that goes over a whole task force when you lose one of your own out there. And I'd only met him a few times, so I didn't know, but it was quite tragic. And you dealt with and got on your job, but I remember the guy I was working with, he was distraught. He'd never even met Wayne, and he was distraught. He goes, I can't believe I'm here, and people have been killed. And I'm going, oh yeah, I'm probably a little bit. I started to judge myself and going, am I a little bit cold to this now, or
desensitised to it?
Desensitised. And I'm going, fuck, mate, you're right. It's fucked. He was at breakfast with us this morning, mate. And then the same afternoon, shit part of the loggies job, I didn't do it, but my mates are doing it. They had to go down and start packing up his gear, right? And I'm sitting there with my mates that night, go, how'd you go? I go, it's fucked, mate. I'm sitting there packing up gear for kids' stuff that he bought on Anaconda and stuff, right? And you're like, yeah, it's quite shocking. The effects, across the whole task force, the group, in Australia. And at the same time, there's blackouts on, right? My wife's working at Hayes here, and, the unfortunate circumstance, Blaine was 42 years old, I was 42 years old, sergeant, and then civvies don't understand the difference. He's an operator, I'm not. Chance of me getting here a lot less, lot less. And then people are telling my wife, oh, that's on the news, 42-year-old sergeant from SOTG's been killed. Here's my wife at work trying to work, keep the tears going. How come he hasn't called me in 4 fucking days? And that's what I say, once again, medals to the wives, right? Besides the tragedy of it. And then that was the only, impacts on my life, and understanding the hurt and the people I supported, how much they fucking gave. Like how much the Task Force 66, FE Alpha, FE Bravo, FE Echo, FE Charlie, how much those FEs put out in their lives, and how much they risked when I had to do did ramp ceremony. And I was sitting in, you see this famous shot of an operator and a Perth and a 2 Commando guy behind. I was sitting in the ranks behind that. I'm like, this is fucking unbelievable. That was a day that the gravity of the job, and the job that the people I supported really struck me. And I thought, whatever I do, I'm doing the fucking best job I can, because I don't have to do what they do. All right, so really, really heartfelt time. Chokes me up now to think about it. I think of the families. And
I'm good friends with Sound Didham's his sister. Like, she's a really close friend of mine, and that he died and was awarded his MG in the way that he went out, and 7 tours. 7 tours of.
Was it really, really hard? I'd never made the link before this. When I was an A battery, I was very good friends with the officers and senior O's, very friends with Mick Fussell. So I coached the A battery rugby side. Fuss was one of my halfbacks. Right, so scrum halves.
2008.
2008. I still wear him there every day. He's on my wrist, and I worked with him in East Timor, and I didn't go through that story in East Timor. We can talk about it later, but he, I was caught at the Commando markets one day, surrounded by, the Sevens gang going off, and I had a bunch of civvies. Rafi's driving in that I was putting in a perimeter. He was the QRF commander, came rolling in on the APCs. Nothing makes writers run like fucking track. Let over the side, there's old red-headed Fuss. He goes, oh, yeah, Smithy. I said, are you the relief? He goes, yes, I am. I said, thanks, sir. I'm fucking out of here. I'll fussle the love muscle.
Mate.
When we lost Dids, and that made me sort of reflect back on, I think, it was only a couple of years ago we lost Fuss. Fuss was out on the, and Fuss is somebody I knew personally. I'd spent a lot of time with Fuss at A Battery, and was a brilliant young officer. And that I still, and it's the arty community, we still, I know Fuss is on the wall for 4R, but Fuss was a gunner.
And mate, I look at it too, and it's a really powerful statement that you just said, where as a loggy, mate, the people that you were supporting, mate, you only got to talk to Teagues and how close she got to some of those, Betty and a few, Nick and a few others, and mate, that statement is that drives it home as to what you guys were doing.
Absolutely, you just it really centers you. It centers what you do, and I think I don't know. It's like you do come back with it. You are part of the team, right? People know how much you work, but it's also you feel like you got everything you do. If I got to work 20 hours a day, fuck it, bang it in. I'm going to work 20 hours because I don't have to do what else do. I don't have to step off a ramp and assault a fucking building or anything. So I was very, and I'm too old, broken by then anyhow.
But I think for you too, what it represents too is you realise that the job you are doing is more meaningful for the guys that we lost, and how short life is, and it makes you really appreciate your life and take stock of where you're at in your life.
Look, it's we did a lot of peacekeeping when I was younger, but when I went there and started seeing the actual war fighting, when you turn up and there's a board on the wall that tells you how many kills have gone down that month, you go, fuck, I'm not in Disneyland anymore, this is the real deal, and the blokes that I'm looking after here are taking the real risks every fucking day. So fuck it, if I lose a couple of hours sleep, who gives a fuck? I've got to do a better job. 100%. And that's what drove me. And it's sort of maybe a message out there, not everyone is going to be an operator, right? They're a very select few. but there's still bits you can contribute. So, just because you're a loggy doesn't mean you're not out of the fight. You're still in the fight, right? You still contribute. Just because I was not a gunner anymore, I was doing this, still had my role to play and still had the thing to do. Because if I didn't do my job, I would hate to think that something I didn't do or I didn't cover caused the effect of hurt or get somebody killed. So I just, you just work your ass off. And most loggies are like that. And army guys are just like that too. We're selfless. We take that into business later, I think.
100%. Yeah. And so you have that, and 6-month trip again, that one?
It was only about 3 months, that one. Yeah, back in for the fight. Yep. And then I came back home, stripped off civilianised, went back to my public service job for a couple of days, went to Merriweather Beach doing CrossFit, living the dream, thinking, that's about it for me. I must be tapped out by now. I'm an old bloke.
No, mate, not for you.
No.
Mate, 2013, 2014, you post into Special Operations Advisory Group, and then you deploy as a mentor, and you deploy here as with a previous guest, mate, as Dan Fortune, DSC and Bar, mate.
Yeah.
And talk me through this trip. Another, mate, like...
Well, so that one started quite... not the normal pathway to deployment. I think any of them were. Once again, I was out just doing reserve days at SFTC. I was working a public service gig here in Newcastle, shopping at Katara, for those who know Newcastle. And I got a sat phone come through, and everyone knows a sat phone, pause, beep, delay, and it's fucking Western Hennessy. H. I'm like, fuck. Tell you, we weren't the best of mates before that. I worked with him at Commando and SFTC, but we're not, best friends or anything. He was in the operator world. I think he was on tag a lot of that time, doing his thing down there. I think he was a tag after Nick Hill. So he went through that. And he's like, what are you doing? Fucking shopping, mate. He goes, what are you doing the next few weeks? He goes, we've got this job, blah, blah, blah. They had a Norwegian mentor and a German mentor, but they wanted a NCA. They were both officers. We wanted an Australian logistic mentor to come and help mentor the GDPSU, General Protectorate Police Special Units. For those who've understand the Afghanistan dynamic, they were special police, look nothing like police. They look like operators. And 2.5 weeks later, 3 weeks later, I was going through our Minhad and I landed in Kabul, and H picked me up, threw me in a car, which I did get in the car, funniest moment. It took me about half an hour to warm up the courage to go, hey, H, can we go zero on my fucking rifle? And he goes, what, dude? What cunt? And I'm like, I'm not even zeroed, mate. I got this thing out of fucking our Minhad. He's like, fuck, I'll get you to the range.
So, mate, for people who aren't aware, zero in, what, like for the listener who...
That rifle was not set for me. It was just a rifle out of the armory, not set for me, so I could have been banging away and not hitting anything if I had to shoot.
Yeah, right.
And it dawned on me when I arrived in Kabul, when I'm driving around in semi-up armoured Cav, they call it, or a Land Cruiser, through the streets of Kabul with no escorts. I'm like, what do we do here? And he goes, you just go out, visit all the Afghan team sites, you, your partner, and an interpreter every day. Like, I might need to fucking zero this thing, mate. You go, that's a good idea. Fucking yeah.
So, mate, what was, and look, how was Kel, mate, when see Dale, I'm off again. Like, how did she cope with that? Like,
she's pretty resilient, I think, by that stage. She's pretty worn into the routine, ground into it. And, we're about to buy a house. I think we're about to, we hadn't even bought this land. So I was over there. She bought this land where we live in Fern Bay. She bought this with power of attorney, which is only supposed to be there for when you get knocked or you're incapacitated.
Yeah.
So she goes, I've used power of attorney. We just bought a block of land at Fern Bay. So she must have been doing all right. She was spending money. So she bought this, and God love her, she bought the best block of land ever, right on the bush and the beach here.
Yeah,
so
mate.
Right on the back of the beach.
That's beautiful. And so, mate, that trip over there when you're in the advisory position and being the mentor, was that a trip that you were like, it was a bit hairy and a bit compared to the other times that you've been in Afghanistan?
I thank Christ I had someone around like H. That guy's experience, I'm sure his testimony will speak for himself, right? In that environment, that was his environment. That's where he lived. I'm sure that's where he lived. And he possibly still lives there mentally. He was that sort of guy. I remember after the first week or so, I rang Kelly on a sad day. She was down the street here having a coffee in Derby Street. And I rang her and we went through the normal stuff. And I said, by the way, started talking to her. I said, by the way, just make sure everything's lined up and just in case everything's prepared. And she's like, what the fuck are you talking to me about this for? You never talked like this before. I go, just make sure it's all good. She goes, what's it like over there? You're not in just a base, are you? I said, no, can't really talk about what I'm doing because I didn't know what I could talk about. Scared to breach any OPSEC. But, eventually she got through the communication that, I was leaving the wire every day, going out on the streets, mentoring Afghans all over Kabul and outside the Ring of Steel to our fielding sites with myself, Naeem was our first interpreter, and Hagen, who was my German captain that we worked with. We did have a Norwegian major. They didn't normally come out. They were doing the staff work, but we were out with the Afghans every day. And, every day you get the BOLO list of what's out there, the threats, and then every couple of weeks you'd hear about another team just that looks like ours because there was mentoring teams all over Kabul. For people who were in crazy Kabul at that time, there was mentoring teams everywhere. And they'd, go, all right, yeah, 3 Americans just got whale the other day. We'd come through in our trips, sites that, a couple of hours before that just, cars got whaled. So, interesting environment to operate, changed my whole dynamic. But I had the best partner in the world. So Hagen Fischer, he was a captain, ex-Fallschirmjäger guy, support member with Task Force 47, which is a German task force, but was down there. He was fantastic, and I loved getting in the car with him every day because, we just do our thing. You cover up all your army gear, so you just take T-shirts and just put a shamag around. I'm very lucky with a beard and my hat. I probably looked a little Afghan, but he was like 6'6" with a square jaw like this, and he was a big German, right? I go, mate, can you make yourself look any more inconspicuous because we really fucking stand out. But it was good every morning. Every day we get in the car, so how do we stay alive, right? And he'd go, all right, so we've got to pick different paths every day, break that pattern of life. And these are all the briefs, like people like H and that give us briefs on how to do things right. Make sure you do this. So we'd break that path every day. I go, all right, we'll go this way, that way. And he goes, yes, we have this possibility, this possibility, this possibility. And I go, do you mean that option? He goes, yes. So we'll do this one because we did this one the other day. And we're like, okay. So we just take different directions all day. They had the anti-IED sort of antennas on cars. We ripped all that off.
Yeah, right.
Because in Kabul, that wasn't the threat. The threat was more magnetic mines or VBIEDs, which were the pressure plates on the front of the cars. So our theory was that, the ones that got whacked were the ones that were driving like Westerners. So we'd just drive like Afghans, really slow in the left lane and hide behind jingle trucks and things like that all over the town. or hide in traffic and look inconspicuous, right?
Yeah, far. Because I know Dan talked about it a lot on his podcast, and he said that was, of all his Afghan trips, he said he was struggled and that he was gone. Like he thought every time on that trip, he thought, and for the last 3 months, he said he thought he was just going to die every time he went outside that wire. And for you, is that a feeling that you'd never felt before?
Absolutely. Yeah, it was a reality check for my career. I thought, wow, here I am. I'm really in it now. Most of my job's been supporting. This time I was the mission. I was outside the wire. And it's probably a lesson out there for people that go through the army. Like, just because you're a loggy doesn't mean you're not going to be in a threat environment, especially in a battle space like Afghanistan, counterinsurgency. Like, everywhere is a battlefield. It doesn't matter where you go. So it really sunk in, and I paid attention more than I ever paid before when people were trying to teach me things. Like, we'd go to the range for the day, the operators would be there, Paulie Evans and all those guys would be there. They'd be teaching us how to shoot again, teaching us how to pie a corner, teaching us how to do things that we never got taught as loggies. And go, well, you now need to know how to get out, crack the doors and get out of a car. Let's go through that. And we're like, fuck, I'm getting the Soldiers 5 on how to fucking crack a door and get out of a car in case we're hit, and then learning things like get off the X. What the fuck is the X, mate? Well, that's where the fucking fire's coming. That's right. Okay, so get off the car. Yep, car's no good, mate. Get away from it. Work back. I'm like, I'm just a loggy. He goes, yeah, they don't care, mate. So learning off people like H and that, never had to really do it, but started really paying attention to those, how to operate outside the wire, how to do things, sort of thing.
For you, mate, like as you say, you've come through East Timor, Bougainville, Solis, you're in Afghanistan, but this is the first time where it's, you might have to
kinetic environment.
Yeah, kinetic environment. Shoot a gun to protect your life.
The biggest thing that was probably the VBIDs and things that went off. I remember there was some funny times, but not so funny. We were outside the ringer still at a fielding site with millions of dollars of American equipment coming in. Part of my job was to field the equipment to the Special Police training wing, which is at Logar. So I get stuff out the Logar, ammunition loads, and organised fielding, which is what they call the tashkil, which is just like an equipment list. So I had to do that. And I remember I was outside the wire once with Hagen, and then all you heard was just those big detonations all over Kabul. So 3 massive detonations going off on Kabul. And then I'm like, everything's going up, sirens going up. We were outside the ringer still, so the barriers had gone down. We couldn't get back in. Whether it was safer outside or in, I don't know. I'm on the phone. I'm sitting there talking to H on the phone because he's our SF team advisor. His job is to make sure that all the mentoring teams full of blokes like me, loggies, are safe, controlled. He monitors where we are. He's responsible for our safety, right? I'm calling him up, and he's got him on the Roshan, which is a mobile, having a chat to him. He goes, right, give me a grid where you're at. I went to the map. I said, I can't fucking read that, mate. And he goes, really? No, I can't. I had to get Hagen to read it. I just realised I'd got so old, I needed my fucking glasses to read a map. And I thought, maybe my fucking time is done here.
Yeah, right.
So I got the grids, got us inside, got us back in through what is now famously Abbey Gate. That was one of our main bits. So we got back in through the ringer still, back into I think it was Camp Route White, and then back into Abbey Gate. No, Camp Purple. Route Purple and back into Abbey Gate. Got through there, sat there for the day until everything calmed down, and then they were the things like H, you'd then say, right, you can go back to ISAF headquarters, which was the other side of Kabul, right, in the green zone. So I lived in the green zone, but we operated everywhere else.
So, mate, talk me through that, because you're travelling through Kabul and it is like heightened, war is winding down.
Yeah.
Mate, that would be the fear factor of
every day. Yeah.
Every day you're going,
getting out of a car. I tell you, those deep breaths. Like I was in a trained warfighter. Trained to a degree, but nothing like the others. They had the courage. I'm sure everyone takes courage in different things. For me, just getting out 200 metres outside the wire, outside the checkpoint, the work to the outer barrier checkpoint, you had to escort your cars in. So Hagen and I used to just take turns. We had a deal. I said, right, 50-50, you do 50% of the walk-ins, I do 50% of the walk-ins. Walking through the outside, you go to the outer perimeter, that's the Afghan checkpoint at Abbey Gate, and then you've got the 200 metres of walk, and that's where, famously at the end, you would have seen on the news, Abbey Gate's where it all went off. You have to walk down that open bit, and you have to walk in front of the car, and the whole time, taking those walks, you just take them on. And they were times for me like, you do get a little bit. It does start. You start getting used to it, but the first few times, I'm like, fuck, I've got to crack the doors and walk out in the street here myself. And I don't have 40 other Australians or a platoon of commandos to help me. Because normally I'd just be supporting them. I wouldn't be the mission. It was quite different. We were the mission. Yeah.
So did you come to that point of that? If it was your time, it was your time. Like, had you contemplated that and come to terms with it could happen?
It probably did to a degree. I don't think it was such a boom that moment. I think you just got used to, I've got to go do my job. You replace it with a bit of humour and things, right? Some dark humour. Yeah, you throw plenty of dark.
Always
humour.
Dark humour.
I used to get in the car. I used to get in the car with Hagen because he's German, and I'd open up the ashtray 2 or 3 times. He goes, "What you doing?" I'm just going to see if you left anyone there, mate.
Mate, black humour.
Oh, it's terrible.
Mate, we all use it.
Oh, it was terrible.
First
he goes,
responders.
Funny. So he was hilarious. He was the best guy. He's still in Germany now. He works for a contractor.
Yeah, right.
He was great. Fantastic officer.
So
teaching him how to do things was funny. I remember I had to get my Afghan to a helicopter, which I think Dan was on that same chopper, to get him out onto a site. And as I'm driving through Kaya, I'm speeding. I'm doing, the police are looking around all the time. The NATO police are always hunting people. I flew past and overtook these Canadians. By the time I pulled up near where the hairlays were, I got my Afghan out. I'd taken his AK off him because he wasn't allowed to have it. Started running over to the chopper, and I see this Canadian pull up behind the car, and it's and Hagen's leaning in the car because he's going to take the car back to base.
Yeah.
And this huge Canadian, mate, like he was big, starts having a go at Hagen, and Hagen just pulls his 6'6" rig out and goes, "What's your problem?" And he started having a go at Hagen, and he just goes, fucking eat a dick, cunt. And just shut the door and fucking drove off. And I'm walking across going, fucking yes, I just taught him. Because Germans are not like that.
No.
I taught him how to be Australian. That was like a dad moment. I taught my captain how to tell some fucking wanker to eat a dick.
Oh, mate, that's gold. And
yeah, loved it.
so you finished that, and that's 6 month tour, that one, or was that?
Yeah, just a little over, I think. I was over there for right towards the end. So it was still ISAF up until I think it was the February of 2014.
Yep.
And I was there probably one of the last big things that had happened. I was at Task Force 51, which were the Norwegians inside Kaya. We're over there for, we go there for dinners because all the SF community, they go around. So I was over there for dinner, and that's when they had that complex attack on I think it was a Lebanese restaurant near the Norwegian embassy. And I was inside their SOC C or inside their command cell. And we were stuck at Kaya for hours because, that attack was pretty brutal. I was sitting in this command cell, lucky enough because we're a Five Eyes nation, I was allowed to sit in there and do stuff. Some of the other people couldn't. And it was that day that they, our teams and the 222 teams and the Australian mentors had to go over there because the Taliban suicide squad hit a couple of doors on the restaurant, breached the doors with suicide bombers, and then went into the restaurant and then killed everybody in the restaurant, firepower overmatch, because everyone in the restaurant had 9mm they were in there, or whatever, their AKs or whatever they're armed with. Their own security guards had run. So our guys went in there with the Afghans, and the Afghans did the work right by that stage. 222 was their critical response unit. They were very well trained by the Norwegians and the Kiwis, and they went in there and reduced the threat. By that time, it was too late. There was no one to save. It was pretty dark end of the war when I was going, and getting home that night, it dawned on me how real this all is. 20 odd people just died the night. They're all UN workers and aid workers and things like that. And the worst thing was probably the next few days you had to worry about how you did relationships, because as a mentor you didn't want to insult anyone, because you're constantly told that they only have two ways to get out of an insult, right? One is either kill you, or the other one is go to a shorer. So you did your best not to step on people's toes, especially the Afghans you're mentoring. Well, we had calls the next day that they had to go get. They couldn't find all the phones and everything off the dead UN workers. Well, suddenly enough, they were all pinging up at our base over here. I'm like, well, who the fuck's going to go over there and tell those guys they need to hand back the phones from the dead, Norwegian girl that just died in the restaurant? And you're like, fuck that. That's going to turn into a gunfight. Really hard things. And I think they're the sort of things Dan Fortune, he would have been on top of having to sort that out, politically and with commanders again, without people losing face. So hats off to people like him that had that command responsibility with the Afghans, and ourselves. Not to say, people who talk about the Afghans, they are some of the bravest people in the world, mate. Absolutely. It's just some of their other cultural pieces I couldn't understand. But bravery-wise, warriors, I'm sure they're just as good as anybody. And
because at that point, I know Dan told me that a lot of the green on blues were happening a lot more.
Definitely.
And you were over there, mate. So you would have.
Very worried about that. I was probably more worried about my nephew, because I didn't lean on this before. My nephew was in 2CAV on his first deployment in Afghanistan on that trip.
Yeah, right.
So young Alex was a trooper, and besides I pulled some battlefield tours and flights to go down to Kandahar to visit him once, which was all above board, I suppose. Dodgy flight on a French NATO flight to go down and visit my nephew. Met him there. He was in Kabul at that stage too, and where he was at Karga, I think they used to call it Sandhurst in the sand, right? RMC in the sand. He was out there as a guardian angel, and they had a couple of green on blues. He was in that environment. Where I worked in the GDPSU, they were special police. We just looked like operators, but special police. They had police badges. They were under a bit of a different agreement. This is the brief that I was told. People like H and that might be able to extend more on that, but they were on an agreement that they were spoken for or sponsored by somebody else. And if he ended up doing something wrong, this guy here was in trouble as well, right? And his family's in trouble. So they put names forward. So they had that redundancy. And I don't think and I could be wrong, but I don't think the GDPSU had any green on blues.
Yeah, right, okay.
So they had numerous 20 or 30 odd provincial companies, including the one that was at Task Force 66, which was call sign 666, which the Australians mentored. A lot of the two Commando guys mentored that group. And then they had four special response companies, which was 222, 333. They were like highly trained, critical response units, basically. One of those was in Kabul, and that was at Camp Line, just outside down from Kaya. So they had that. They didn't have any problems. Highly trained.
Yeah, right.
Highly trained. So not that I know of, maybe the provincial companies might have had a problem, but the critical response units, very, very high standard, very professional. I always thought during the collapse, where are these guys going to go? Because I'm sure they made the Taliban pay every time they were inside a contact. They were 222 from memory were the ones that went into the hotel in Kabul when the Taliban took over the hotel. They're the ones that reclaimed that as well.
Yeah, right.
So they're absolute, fiercely trained. From when I arrived, there was a Norwegian Task Force 51 that was mentoring. And they were the Marina Jaeger Commando, so they're Marine Special Forces right up the north. And before that, I believe it was the Kiwis, because they must have been there, because on half the helmets you're seeing a black leaf, fern leaf. So I'm sure the Kiwis were there at some time, and they were responsible. I think it was between the Norwegians and the Kiwis trained those guys. So,
yeah, right.
SF, it would have been the SAS, I believe, from New Zealand, who trained those guys up. Really, really, really well trained, really well qualified.
Yeah, right. Far out, mate. And then, so that, you have that trip, you come home, and how are you travelling mentally at this point?
I was probably at my point I needed a breakaway, and I hated my job. I didn't want to go back to the public service job that I had here or the reserves. I did not want to do any of that, and I was just caught. You got to pay a mortgage, and you got to stay near your family. Went back to it. Then I just started hunting for a job. Look, what else can I do? That sort of gets me out of this routine. And I hunted around. I ended up pulling a job with Boeing. In defence industry, and this is another one, right? A lot of people say, where do you want to be? You always got to take that moment. People say, oh, you can't do that. That's not, how the hell are you going to do that, mate? And you go, well, I'm going to give it a shot, and always have a go. Never be told you can't. Otherwise you get stuck in that, put your head down, oh, they're right, I'm hopeless. What am I going to do? I never went to uni. I'm not going to have that job with Boeing. Got that job, was with Boeing, working on the E7A program up here. Customer was RAAF. Interesting environment, interesting transition, especially after multiple tours. I struggled mentally. I've been there a few times myself. I think I went down, thinking you had everything, you end up in that environment, you work out you have so many gaps from your civilian training. I must have think I went down my time at that program when I was working for Boeing and coming back. I probably had my darkest moments. I'll be no doubt, and Kelly's probably listening, but I probably planned my own suicide 3 or 4 times because I just didn't like who I was, and didn't think I could cope on the outside. Ended up in a ball basically in the front room here one night. Kelly pulling me out of that, like sitting back in tears, just broken man.
And that, mate, I've been there myself. It's
hard to talk about, hey?
It is, mate, but it's why I started the podcast, and it's quite ironic, mate. As I said to you, today is the 10th anniversary of my suicide attempt, and mate, it's actually to sit here with you and to see where I've come and how far I've come, and this is why I do the podcast, mate. It's to break that stigma down, mate, and to help guys out there and girls to say that, hey, it's okay to be vulnerable and speak, and mate, you get in such a dark place. And you do think that the world would be a better place without you here. And
who's going to notice? No one. I'm not achieving anymore. I'm not going to have anything. People would be better off with my insurance money or whatever. You go down all those spirals, right? And it was a bit of a spin, to get out of that. And what gets you out of that again is the rocks in your life, your family, Kelly, family and things like that get you out of it. I think it was I hit the reserve handle on that day. And I took a week off, took some time, balanced myself, and I think from that time period up, I started coming good. Then COVID hit, but then again, that was just not being on deployment, couldn't leave your house. I found that path up. And from then I started working my way through the business. I changed off that program, started backing myself, started educating myself more and learning more, investing in myself, and just being prepared to fail again. Just like I was a young digger and go, oh, well, I failed the weapons test. I've got to go back and do it again. Gave it a shot, and worked my way into the company that I worked on, the UK E7 program, their ground systems support and mission system support, learning how to build a bill of materials and how to pitch that to a customer and price it and escalate, all these things that you don't learn in the army. And you think you're an expert because when you leave the army, you're a war officer, mate. You know everything. Well, you know fuck all. All right. And you go to business, you know about 30% of what you need to know.
Yep.
So I was on a learning curve again. Did that time on that program. Had an opportunity at Boeing once again. They are in a capability model. And I applied for a capability manager's job and landed it. And I ended up with some amazing people in that job. And at the same time, I was starting to get to know an organisation at Boeing, which was started up by someone very famous we all know, Mark Donaldson, VC. He started Boeing Veterans Australia, kicked that off in the veterans programs and that. So I started getting involved with that at the lowest levels, helping legacy, helping veterans at doing the separation stuff for transition into industry or transition from the military. Started going down and doing those talks at the DVA transition seminars and things like that, and I found purpose. I found purpose again. Besides what I had to learn at Boeing, my job, I found something purposeful that made me feel good. Right? It was like a drug, helping other veterans become a drug.
How good is it, mate?
That's where I ended up in that space, and became a manager at Boeing. Don't everyone tell you can't do stuff, right?
100%. And before we continue on into what you're doing now, I just want to touch back on, mate, you played a major role or had a role in supporting, so you went to the SFTC training centre and you had a pivotal role in supporting commando selection and training courses and doing the reinforcement cycle. Yep. How rewarding was that for you, mate?
That was an amazing process to watch. So talk about SF community and what they do and how professional they are. See them apply that to a training cycle and a selection cycle was just like watching magic happen, mate. I was like, these guys are so good at what they plan. And to say I had a pivotal role, well, I won't say just a lobby, but as pivotal as making sure that 1, 3 and 5 stay alive. Rations, fuel, ammunition, everything's there ready to go. Buses, trucks are there ready to go. Maintenance schedules are ready to go. All those enabling pieces, quiet pieces in the background. Because you can't fight a war with just a bayonet. And you took that piece, and once again, watching that reinforcement cycle, I learned so much about how to plan, how to strategize, how to execute a plan properly and monitor. Probably learned more about project management from being at SFTC than I have learnt doing project management courses. How to put things together, how to continually monitor, how to continually communicate, how to do your check-ins, how to do your milestoning. Learnt all that by watching these guys and being part of the planning process of running a selection and running a reinforcement. And my observation for that was, everyone talks about selection for those guys. I think the hardest part watching those guys go through was watching them go through reinforcement. They worked their asses off, mate. Like, we do 10, 15-hour days supporting them, whatever it was. But they were through the ringer, and some of them didn't get to the end of it. And I felt, my heart fell for them because our job was to send them back to units as long as we get them. So, for the ones that got through that, the 10 to 12 months of Rio, mate, they deserve the beret they got, right? Because, I'll challenge anyone to say they take it away from them because they deserve what they got. And I was privileged enough to get a window and a lens that not every person in the army gets to see unless they go through the selection process. I was privileged enough to get a window, a lens and a seat at the table to watch that happen. And, I'm quite, pleased that I did. I never would have seen otherwise because it is a veil of secrecy for a good reason.
Absolutely.
They keep things quiet for a good reason unless they let you in and accept you. And it was, I kind of feel I must have sort of been accepted.
Absolutely. And is that where you worked with Bergs, and is that where you worked with the late Nick Hill?
Nick Hill was, when I first got there, Nick was running the ACQB course, a bunch of great operas. Frank Carey was one of the first people I met there as well, and I'm sure you should try and get Frank on here. He's a legend. Absolute legend to watch. I watched him run amphib courses, and I just felt nothing but sorrow for those trainees. He'd be talking to me in one language like pure calm, then he'd just split second break off and he'd just be abusing some operator was on the Rio course for not doing his D-serve on the beach correctly. I'm just like, what? Mental. He's a legend. Once again, I had the privilege of working with some amazing people and people that are probably quite, legendary status. And if you're in that side of the world or people who know those things, Frank was another one of those guys. That I worked with. Yeah.
As you say, mate, throughout your career, mate, you've been blessed to serve alongside some amazing guys and girls, it's shaped who you are. And as you said, mate, you're now currently working for Boeing, and you've found purpose and direction again. And mate, I just want to touch on how important do you feel, or as you've transitioned, how important is it now, and what advice can you give to guys and girls that are currently in and eventually do that transition?
So the transition piece, for me personally, and this is one of the reasons I get involved with Boeing veterans, is finding that meaningful employment that you feel like you're contributing still. Because the hardest piece when you separate is like, what's the mission? What do we contribute? You get a bit lost in your space, and I feel some of my friends did. Even I did. I stayed with the reserves on the reserve books for a reason. I could just dabble back in and dabble back out, and it sort of helped me with my mental health. So I would say a lot of people rag on joining the reserve when they leave. I say not. I'm the opposite. I'd say just go do 20 days a year, mate. Put it on now and then and go do what you need to do. And it's a bit of a mental health break. So you're going out for ages, go back, get a bit of a dose, take a bit of medication, you've got your green on, and then you come back out. And I've stayed with it, for that reason. So don't just dismiss going to the reserve. And, I'm going to get my haters for that. But it's true, and it's a capability that we need, because we're never going to have enough regular forces in Australia on the books for anything that we need. So having a good reserve is essential, and if you can take those great skill sets, if you're not too tainted, and we're all tainted, stick it out, because it actually helps with your transition if you go to the reserve and find the right unit or the right space. I've never been in 2 div. I was lucky enough as a reserve. I've always stayed with SOCOM, Forces Command, Headquarters, and by that stage I was a WO 1, and then Army Headquarters where I am now. So I was lucky enough to keep that in my space. Finding that meaningful employment is the key, and don't let people tell you can't. You're just another shot at it tomorrow. All right. And I had a lot of people tell me you can't do that. Or I've even had people go, "How the fuck did you get a job like that, Smithy?"
It's interesting, mate. It's something we said when we first caught up is start that transition from day one. That you're not going to be a lifer.
Handover starts the day you start the job.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
And I mentor people at Boeing now. A lot of them ex-veterans that come in the industry too. And I've got, it's one of the first principles I teach them. You're starting a handover now, mate. I just got here. Yep. Today, starting your handover. Start writing your handover. Because
you're not going to stay and...
You're not here forever.
And outside, mate, of like mentally, as you said, what helps you now is what grounds you is getting out on your bike and getting in the surf. And
surf's great.
Yeah, and has exercise still been a big part of your mental health recovery as well?
Yeah, it has. Like most veterans, we try to link into that. I must admit, I'm more broken than I look a lot. You've seen me walk around here.
Yeah, I have.
I'm suffering injuries, but I live by the theory as well. Motion is lotion. So if I stop, I could just crawl up in a ball and take painkillers. And there was a period in my life when I went through my episodes, and when I was planning my own suicide, I was heavily addicted to codeine. And I had a doctor that was giving me DVA scripts, and I was walking out with a pile of codeine like that and a pile of Forte like that, and I was eating them like lollies. Because whenever I wanted to disconnect, I just fucking pop a pill and I just fucking disconnect on the pill. So I'm pretty well clear. I've taken a little bit of medication this year, one script, where I had a bit of an episode. But I'm clear. I'm not on regular 3 monthly cycles of getting popped up with enough medication to zone my eyeballs out.
It's a credit to you, and it's, as I've learnt too, mate, like I'm not medicated now. I've just found other ways to help me get through with meditation, gratitude, visualization, all that. And I'm very faithful now. I'm very, very faithful. Like you, I love riding motorbikes, and exercise is something, and I'm coming back from injury myself. But mate, doesn't matter whether you walk 5 minutes, half an hour. That's, you know.
I love it. I really enjoy the soldier on stomp at the start of the year. I always do the march on challenge. You know.
Yep.
I lead Boeing veterans for that for the last few years. We continually raise around $20,000 for that every year. It's very passionate about soldier on as well because of fuss and the connection.
Absolutely.
So like to keep the walks. I haven't done as much. I've been a lot of it, but I'm not going back to that medication because I think that medication drove part of my mental state as well, right?
Absolutely.
You know, and that, you know, that sometimes that mental state was around, oh, really, am I an imposter here? You know, I wasn't a shooter. Well, I must be a bit of an imposter. You know, but you help you put it together, right? It's like telling a story today. I didn't think I'd have anything interesting to say for people.
Mate,
I was just a loggy.
It's been, nah. It's just been hectic. Like, and as you say, the Kabul trip, like that's just, you know, and it's an experience that, you know, not many loggies would get to experience, mate. And you
got a photo with my nephew at the Kabul airport, mate. When he was a young trooper.
Mate, that's...
Young Sergeant Alex Smith, mate, for the record now, down at recruiting in Melbourne.
Yeah, right. Oh, there you go.
Handsome young lad.
Yeah, nice. And
almost as good looking as his uncle.
Mate, yeah, I love it. Modesty, mate. I love it. So, mate, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give to your 18-year-old self, and would he listen?
The advice that I would give to my 18-year-old self is pay attention more during the briefing. Don't be such a dreamer out the fucking window. My problem with my brain is I'm thinking 3 steps ahead where I'm currently at.
Yep.
And that's a problem. And I usually have to do the first step and go, oh, fuck, what was step 1? So, yeah. Would he listen? Likely not, because he's probably thinking about the 3rd step looking out the window.
So, mate, looking back now, was joining the army and everything that you've been through, was it still the best decision you've ever made?
Absolutely. I walked into it blindly with a commitment of, I think, 3 or 4 years. I'll be done with this. It's become my life. Yeah. It's become my life. I love it. And I don't know about the other services, and I've talked to other services. Navy seems to be very bonded. Army, very bonded, you know, from units to grades. We're still all in contact. People see us on Anzac Day, but I compare it to like RAF. And I work with a lot of RAFs. They go, what are you going to go to your reunion? Like I went to organised the 2016 reunion with Huck and Rammers down in Sydney for 103 100th anniversary. They go, no, we don't do that stuff, mate. We just go out and do a totally different bond. You know, to quote the famous Jocko Wilkes for the Army bond, when he puts out on his, on his YouTube audio, the only reason you remember it because it sucked. Right, it's memorable because it sucks, and that's Jocko Wilkes' quote.
Yeah,
well, and he's spot on.
It's true, mate. Like, think of how many times you've sat in, you're wet and you're bored, or it's raining and you're under a hoochie, and mate, you bond through those times. That's what it's about.
Best mates from my first unit. I got mates that I still talk to from 105 Battery right to my time on Task Force, in GDPSU.
Yeah,
still good mates with my 2 interpreters. One's here in Australia, Naeem, he's here in Australia, and the other one's over in the States.
Mate, friends for life. And doesn't matter if you see him, 15 years later, it's like picking up a conversation.
Like yesterday, mate.
Exactly right, mate. And mate, what are your plans going forward with Kel and Jet into the future?
Well, hopefully he'll just get his own place one day. He's 18 now. I have no idea. I'm sure he's going to be here till he's about 35. Why wouldn't you? Cost of living these days.
That's right.
Well, we plan on. We're not going to leave Newcastle. We like this place. I've had an option to move with Boeing. Not too keen on that. I'd rather stay here at 53 now. Just recently turned, and this is it for us. We got this house. We purchased another place in town in the Store Apartments in Newcastle. We might go City Life for a while and rent this place, but pretty well we're going to stay here.
Mate, it's where you are. It's a beautiful spot, mate. It's absolutely...
Stockton Fern Bay area.
Yeah,
beautiful.
Mate, beautiful.
It's a hidden gem.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. It's when I was like, oh, wow, this is... Mate, and I suppose now for you, mate, it's just spending quality time with Kel and Jet. And you've earned that time, mate.
Yeah, my health is probably... I've got to stay on top of that, do everything you can to stay healthy and stay fit and keep the weight off as well. That's the other trap when you're on medications, you end up putting weight on.
Yep.
And that brings down your mental state as well. So, as you're aware.
Yes.
Yeah, so probably stay healthy and just, live out here pretty well. I don't think we'll any plans to move. Not that the boss has told me yet. Not at all. Yeah.
Mate, how do people get in contact with you if they want to reach out and they're struggling or trying to look at transitioning, or how do they get in contact with you?
Okay, so the easiest way to get in contact is probably through my Instagram or Facebook page. If you just want to reach out, send me a message. Professionally, where I've gone to in my career, I am currently the co-president of Boeing Veterans Australia, and we are heavily involved in supporting ex-service organisations, community engagement. We're also heavily involved in veterans transitions and support. So there's always pathways to get me on LinkedIn. I'm heavily involved on LinkedIn, and I've reached out and supported plenty of people in that regard. So leading that, it's a really good organisation, set up very well by Mark Donaldson, right? He started that off for the company, and then it's just transitioned from there. And it's something I'm heavily involved with now, as you know. I was very privileged the other day to go down and see Matt Hall. His veteran experience and his PTSD and his mental health experience with Boeing Veterans helped me do that. And likewise, I want to continue that share. That's probably my biggest goal going forward, is making sure that it costs you nothing to help your fellow veterans. And I know the Vietnam veterans before us did that to help us. Like, they paid a lot of way to make things easier for us. Well, let's make it easier for the next generation as well, so they're not putting up as much as well.
Absolutely, mate. And as you know, we're stronger together, mate, by sharing and letting people know that they're not alone. And that's the biggest battle, mate. And that's, I think there's nothing. And I said it the other day in talk I did, mate, that contribution is part of the solution. Yeah. If you can contribute something and help someone else, and that gives you purpose. It makes you feel, when someone reaches out to you and says, Smithy, mate, what you said to me really resonated. It's helped me. Drug. Yeah, it's better than any drug you can have in the world, mate. Yeah. It's when you know that you've been of service and helped someone else. Yeah, absolutely. That's the purpose, mate, going forward. And mate, it's been an absolute honour and a privilege to sit here and record your story, mate. And you've served your country with honour and brought pride to your family. Your story is definitely one of true grit, and just, mate, as you say, just taking that leap of faith and just going with it. And no matter what challenges, mate, just don't hold back. And someone says you can't do it, prove them wrong, mate. And you push on, and you've done that. And mate, there's a quote that I want to finish with that I believe sums up your story. We fall, we break, we fail, but then we rise, we heal, we overcome, no matter what adversity we face in life. Mate, you have done that, and you continue to do that. And mate, I want to thank you for your service to our country. Thank you for all you do for veterans and first responders. And as I say, mate, it's been an absolute honour to have you on True Blue Conversations. So, Dave Smith, thank you so much. No. And, mate, I look forward to cracking a beer with you.
No worries, mate. Thanks, Adam. Mate, and look, I just want to say thank you, mate, for taking the time to do this, and especially on a day as significant as this is to you, mate. 10 years ago today, where you were standing on the edge of a cliff, and you made that turn around and you changed your life. So, mate, congratulations on 10 years of getting there.
Thank you.
And going forward and making a change to everyone's life. If you just change one life or save one life, your job's done.
That's it, mate.
Thanks, mate.
No, thank you. Cheers, mate. Thank you.
Welcome, loyal listeners of True Blue Conversations. Today's episode is proudly sponsored by Australian Warfighter Coffee. Veteran owned and run, driven by a simple yet powerful motto: people over profit. Every dollar goes towards supporting veterans and first responder charity groups. Head on over to AustralianWarfighters.com and use the code TrueBlue for your exclusive discount. Because let's face it, any other coffee is just brown sadness water. Thank you for tuning into this episode of True Blue Conversations with your host, Adam Bloom. See you on the front line.